Hello guys, welcome to Fiction Quest. So in this video, we will see, what if Naruto's sacred gear was the Harem King's wool, and fated him to marry Rias, Akeno, and the rest. If you enjoy these kinds of stories, don't forget to show us some love by hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. Your support means the world to us. Now, let's start the story. Chapter 1. The Uninvited King. The air in the Occult Research Club room was thick with a silence that felt heavier than usual. Sunset painted the sky in streaks of orange and violet, casting long, dramatic shadows through the ornate windows of the old-school building. Rias Gremory, her crimson hair a spill of fire against the deep blue of her uniform, stood before a holographic map of Kuo Town projected over a large, circular table. Red dots pulsed with lazy energy, each one a contract, a soul, a piece of her territory. She was the king, here. This was her domain, her charge. Every supernatural tremor, every ripple in the veil, was hers to command or contain. Which was why the new anomaly was so infuriating. It wasn't a dot, it was a void, a patch of absolute nothingness that had appeared on her map 2 days ago. Centered squarely on Kuo Academy's second-year student roster. It absorbed the light of her demonic senses, a black hole where there should have been the faint, flickering soul light of a normal human. It wasn't a stray devil. Those were loud, chaotic messes of uncontrolled power. It wasn't a fallen angel or an exorcist. Their energies, holy or unholy, were distinct and sharp. This was quiet. It was a silence so profound it screamed. Anything, Akeno? Rias asked, not taking her eyes off the void on the map. Akeno Himahima, her vice president and queen, glided to her side. Her smile as serene as ever, though a flicker of tension touched the corners of her eyes. Fufufu. Nothing at all, President. I've cross-referenced every transfer student against the town registry. He's clean. Naruto Uzumaki, orphaned, transferred from a small private school in the north that, according to our records, suffered a catastrophic gas leak and burned to the ground 6 months ago. All records were lost. Convenient, Kiba Yuto murmured from his position near the window. His hand rested lightly on the hilt of a sheathed katana that wasn't part of any school uniform. He was Rias's knight, and his senses were usually razor-sharp, but even he could only shrug in frustration. I've tried to approach him between classes. It's difficult. He's not unfriendly, but he's not open, either. It's like trying to get a read on a stone wall. From the couch, Kaneko Tuju, the petite rook of the peerage, spoke without looking up from the chocolate bar she was methodically unwrapping. He smells like ozone after a storm. And nothing else. That was perhaps the most unsettling part. For Kaneko, with her Nekomata senses, to smell nothing was impossible. It meant the object was either so mundane as to be non-existent, or so well shielded he might as well be. Rias's ruby-red eyes narrowed. This Naruto Uzumaki had been in her school, her territory, for 48 hours. And all he had done was attend his classes, eat lunch alone on the roof, and walk home to a nondescript apartment on the edge of town. He had done nothing wrong. And that was what set every one of her instincts on edge. In their world, true silence was never a sign of peace. It was the deep breath before the slaughter. Suddenly, a flare of angry, chaotic red erupted on the map, miles away in the abandoned industrial district. It was jagged, ugly. Astray, Kiba said, his posture immediately shifting from relaxed to predatory. It's a weak one, Akeno added, her smile tightening. Barely a threat. No threat is. Barely. In my territory, Rias declared, her voice ringing with the authority of her lineage. The Gremory crest flared into existence on the floor, a circle of crimson light that pulsed with demonic power. Let's go. Akeno, Kiba, Kaneko. It's time we reminded our little stray about the rules of Kuo Town. The teleportation was instantaneous, a lurch of space and a crackle of displaced air. They materialized in the shadow of a rusted-out chemical silo, the stench of decay and stagnant water thick in the air. The stray devil, a grotesque creature that looked like a bipedal lizard with too many joints, was shrieking as it tore apart a metal shed, searching for prey. I'll handle this, Kiba said, his hand already on his sword. But before he could take a single step, a blur of motion from the rooftop of a nearby warehouse caught all their eyes. Someone was already there. A figure dropped from the roof, landing with a soft thud that made almost no sound. He wore the Kuo Academy male uniform, but it seemed strangely out of place on him. He had sun-kissed blonde hair that spiked in every direction and eyes the color of a clear summer sky. On his cheeks were faint, whisker-like marks that gave him a feral intensity. It was Naruto Uzumaki. He hadn't seen them. His entire focus was on the stray. The stray devil, sensing new prey, let out a guttural roar and charged, its claws gouging deep furrows in the concrete. Rias prepared to intervene, to save the foolish human who had stumbled into a world he couldn't comprehend. Kiba was already moving, but they were too slow. Or rather, Naruto was too fast. He didn't summon a weapon. He didn't chant an incantation. He simply moved. His posture shifted, his weight sinking low to the ground. As the stray lunged, he flowed around its attack with an impossible grace, his hand striking the creature's extended arm. It wasn't a punch. It was a precise, sharp tap. A sickening crack echoed through the yard. The bone in the stray's arm shattered. The creature howled in pain and fury, swinging its other arm wildly. Naruto ducked under the blow, his other hand coming up to strike the stray's chest. Again, it wasn't a blow of raw power, but something else entirely. A pale blue light, almost invisible, pulsed from his palm for a fraction of a second. The stray devil froze. Its eyes went wide, not with pain, but with shock. Then, it began to convulse. Its demonic energy, the very thing that gave it form and power, was flickering like a dying candle. It was being unraveled. "What is that?" Kiba whispered, frozen in his tracks. He had never seen anything like it. It wasn't holy power, it wasn't demonic magic, it wasn't Tuki. From his vantage point, Naruto spoke, his voice calm and utterly devoid of fear. "You shouldn't be here. You're a mess. A mistake. Time to clean you up." He placed his hand flat against the stray's forehead. The blue light flared again, brighter this time, and the stray devil dissolved. It didn't explode. It didn't burn. It simply came apart, like a tapestry of threads being pulled loose, its demonic energy dissipating harmlessly into the atmosphere until nothing was left but a pile of dust that the evening wind began to scatter. The entire confrontation had taken less than 10 seconds. Naruto stood there for a moment, looking at the spot where the creature had been, his expression unreadable. Then, he sighed, a sound of mild annoyance, as if he'd just had to take out the trash. He turned, and his blue eyes met Rias's across the junk-filled yard. He didn't look surprised to see them. He just looked weary. The silence returned, heavier than before, broken only by the wind whistling through the skeletons of old buildings. Rias Gremory and her peerage, the undisputed rulers of this town, stood in the shadows. Completely and utterly forgotten by the world as a lone transfer student did their job for them with terrifying, silent efficiency. Rias teleported them back, not to the clubroom, but to the foot of the hill leading up to the old school building. The sun had finally set, and the first stars were pricking the deep velvet of the sky. "He knew we were there," Kaneko said, her voice flat. "The entire time. His control is absolute," Kiba added, his usual suave confidence replaced by a deep, thoughtful frown. "He used no wasted movements. Every action had a purpose. He wasn't fighting it, he was dismantling it." Akeno fanned her face, her usual teasing smile gone. My, that was quite the display. That energy he used, it felt so pure, so full of life. It felt like the opposite of a devil's power. Rias said nothing. Her mind was racing. The void on her map was not an absence of power. It was a mastery of it. He was cloaking himself, hiding a angst so profound that it simply registered as nothing to her senses. The implications were staggering. Who was he? What was he? And what was he doing in her territory? As if summoned by her thoughts, he appeared, walking down the path from the main school campus. He wasn't hurrying. His hands were tucked into his pockets, his posture relaxed. He walked past them as if they were nothing more than statues. His gaze fixed on the road ahead. This was an affront she could not ignore. "Naruto Uzumaki," Rias said, her voice sharp, infused with the power of her demonic heritage. The air itself grew heavy, a pressure that would make a normal human fall to their knees. He stopped. He turned his head slowly, his blue eyes meeting hers. The pressure she was exuding seemed to wash over him and dissipate like smoke. He wasn't fighting it, he was simply immune. Gremory-san, he replied, his tone polite but distant. Can I help you? You can start by explaining what you were doing in the industrial district, she said, stepping forward. Akeno, Kiba, and Kaneko fanned out behind her, a silent, intimidating front. Naruto's gaze flickered to each of them before settling back on her. He didn't seem impressed. There was a problem. I took care of it. That problem was a supernatural matter. It was my responsibility, Rias countered, her voice dropping lower. You are a human, in my territory. You have no right to interfere. He tilted his head, a gesture of genuine curiosity. Your territory, the entire town, that's right, and you claim responsibility for everything that happens in it. I do. He finally turned his full body to face her, pulling one hand from his pocket. Then you were late. Your response time is poor. The stray was 5 minutes away from finding a residential area. You're lucky I was closer. The sheer audacity of his statement left her speechless for a second. He wasn't just unafraid, he was critiquing her. He was holding her accountable. Akeno let out a soft, dangerous chuckle. You have a lot of nerve, Uzumaki-kun, speaking to the heiress of the Gremory clan like that. Naruto's eyes met hers. Titles don't matter when people are in danger. Results do. He looked back at Rias. You have power. I can feel it. All of you do. But power without responsibility is just a threat waiting to happen. This was too much. The power of destruction, the signet. You're of the Bale clan inherited by the Gremory, began to crackle around Rias's hands, a nimbus of crimson and black energy. You know nothing of power or responsibility. He didn't flinch. He didn't even brace himself. He just watched her, his blue eyes calm and analytical. For the first time, Rias felt a flicker of doubt. It wasn't a battle of power she was in, she realized. It was a battle of wills. And his was like an immovable mountain. I know that if you claim a territory, you police it, he said simply. If you don't, someone else will. Or someone else has to. His words were a direct challenge to her authority. Her very identity as a king. She was Rias Gremory, sister of the Lucifer, a high-class devil of impeccable lineage. He was no one. An orphan. A transfer student. Yet in this moment, under the pale moonlight, he stood before her not as a subordinate, not as a human to be charmed or intimidated, but as an equal. No, that wasn't right. The feeling she had, looking into his unwavering eyes, was not one of meeting an equal. For the first time in her life, in her own territory, surrounded by her loyal peerage, Rias Gremory felt like she had just been put in her place by a rival monarch. He turned to leave, his point made. If you'll excuse me, I have homework to do. As he walked away, a faint light caught her eye. For just a second, under the glow of a nearby streetlight, an emblem on the back of his right hand seemed to shimmer. It was a complex design she had never seen before, a swirling crimson spiral, like a whirlpool, cradled within a crest of brilliant gold. It glowed with a soft, regal light for a heartbeat, then vanished, leaving only smooth, unblemished skin behind. The symbol felt ancient, powerful, and deeply, fundamentally important. Rias stood rooted to the spot, the crimson energy around her hands fizzling out. She had come seeking answers, to assert her dominance over the anomaly. Instead, she was left with more questions than before, and a chilling, thrilling premonition that the quiet, orderly world she ruled was about to be turned completely upside down. The king of this territory had just met an emperor, and she hadn't even realized it until he was walking away. Chapter 1 End. Chapter 2. The Gremory Gambit. The Occult Research Club room was a chamber of simmering frustration. The regal, almost comforting atmosphere Rias had so carefully cultivated now felt confining. A cage for her agitated thoughts. She paced the length of the Persian rug, her crimson hair a restless river of silk flowing behind her. Kiba, Akeno, and Kaneko watched her, their own expressions a mixture of concern and bewilderment. The solid, predictable foundation of their world had been shaken, not by a stray devil or a fallen angel, but by a single, quiet boy with eyes as blue as the abyss. He dismantled it, Rias said for the third time, her voice tight with a disbelief that was rapidly hardening into analytical fury. He didn't destroy it, he didn't purify it, he unmade it. The demonic energy signature simply ceased to exist. What kind of power does that? Akeno, ever the researcher, had a tablet in her hands, its screen glowing with ancient runes and complex diagrams. I've cross-referenced every known form of energy manipulation. Senjutsu, Chuki, holy power, even the forbidden arts. Nothing matches. Holy power annihilates demonic energy in a burst of light. Senjutsu can disrupt it, but not erase it so cleanly. What he used was fundamental. It was like he was editing reality, telling the stray's energy that it was no longer allowed to be configured that way. He's a sage, Kaneko stated, her voice a low murmur from the depths of the couch. She was nibbling on a yokon jelly, her usual impassivity a thin veil over a deep, instinctual caution. Or something like one. He smells of nature, but a nature that has a will of its own. Kiba leaned against the wall, his arms crossed. His movements were a form of martial arts I've never seen. It was fluid, like water. But the impacts were as final as stone. He targeted the creature's energy pathways, its spiritual nexus points. He wasn't just hitting its body, he was striking its soul. Rias stopped pacing and slammed her hand down on the central table. The holographic map of Kuo flickered, the void that represented Naruto Uzumaki pulsing like a dark heart. I don't care what he is. He's in my territory, wielding a power we don't understand, and operating completely outside my authority. This cannot stand. He is either a threat to be eliminated or an asset to be acquired. Elimination seems a bit premature, don't you think, President? Akeno's voice was a silken purr, but her violet eyes held a dangerous glint. A power like that, imagine it in our service. An unknown sacred gear, perhaps. A new Longinus class, even. The thought hung in the air, seductive and terrifying. A Longinus, one of the 13 ultimate sacred gears capable of slaying gods, WOU. LD changed the balance of power in the underworld. If Naruto Uzumaki possessed one, it would explain his impossible strength. It would also make him a target for every faction in existence. If he has a Longinus, Rias said slowly, the strategic part of her mind taking over, then he is too valuable to be left on his own. He's a blank slate, an unaligned piece of immense power. Sona was right to awe. Me that Kuo has become a hotbed of supernatural activity lately. Perhaps he is the reason why. She looked at her peerage, her expression hardening with resolve. We need to know more. We need to get close to him, understand him. And then, I will make him an offer he cannot refuse. He will become one of us. And if he refuses? Kiba asked, his tone serious. Rias's eyes narrowed. Then he is a threat. And I will deal with him as such. Her mind was set. The Gremory gambit was simple. Observe, approach, and assimilate. It was a strategy that had worked for centuries. She had no reason to believe it would fail now. She refused to even consider the possibility. Naruto Uzumaki's apartment was a study in minimalism. A bed, a small table with 2 chairs, a modest kitchenette, and a bookshelf. Filled with texts that ranged from advanced physics to ancient mythology. There were no photographs, no decorations, no personal touches to suggest a life lived. It was less a home and more a forward operating base. He sat cross-legged on the floor in the center of the room, eyes closed, his breathing slow and even. The world outside, with its car horns and distant sirens, faded into a dull hum. He was listening to a different kind of sound. He was listening to the world's pulse. He could feel the ley lines beneath the city, rivers of natural energy flowing like a hidden circulatory system. He could feel the thrum of demonic power from the old schoolhouse, a confident, regal beat. He could feel the faint, sharp sting of holy energy from a nearby church. And he could feel them. They were like nascent stars in the firmament of his senses. One burned with the intensity of a crimson sun, proud and powerful. Another crackled with the playful danger of a thunderstorm, a mix of shadowed purple and brilliant gold. A third was a flash of silver, swift and precise. And the last was a small, dense point of earthy brown, solid and unyielding. Rias, Akeno, Kiba, Kaneko. Threads of fate, shimmering and ethereal, connected him to each of them. He had been born with the ability to see them, to feel them. It was the blessing and the curse of his sacred gear, the Harem King's will. It wasn't a weapon in the traditional sense. It didn't grant him a sword or a beast of darkness. It was a mandate. A destiny woven into his very soul that identified the women he was fated to be with and granted him the power to protect them. To stand by them, to be their anchor in the coming storm. It gave him a profound understanding of energy, a body that could master any physical art, and a will that could impose itself on reality itself. But it came with a price. It painted a target on his back for forces that resented such a destiny, and it created a life of perpetual conflict. He had felt the FT in the threads the moment he arrived in Kuo. They had tugged him here, to this specific town, this specific school. He knew his path was meant to intersect with the Gremory peerage. He just hadn't expected them to be so territorial. A cold shiver, utterly alien to the flow of natural energy, traced a path across his senses. It was distant, impossibly high up, like a satellite in the cold vacuum of space. It felt like sterilized light, like the absence of all passion and chaos. It was a gaze of pure, calculating judgment. It had been watching him intermittently for months, a silent observer. He couldn't identify but whose presence set every nerve on edge. He opened his eyes, the deep blue of his irises sharp and clear. "You can watch all you want," he murmured to the empty room. "But you can't interfere with this." He had a mission. It wasn't one given to him by a village elder or a military commander. It was a mission handed down by fate itself. Protect them. All of them. Even if they saw him as an enemy first. He stood up, stretching the kinks from his back. He had school tomorrow, and he had a feeling it was going to be a very interesting day. The next day, the Gremory Ji's attempts at reconnaissance were as subtle as a thrown brick. During the lunch break, as Naruto sat on the roof enjoying a simple bento, Kiba Yudo appeared, a charming smile fixed on his face. "Uzumaki-san, mind if I join you?" he asked, not waiting for an answer as he sat a respectful distance away. "Tough day in modern lit, huh? I never thought I'd see someone argue with the teacher about tea." He existential undertones of Shakespeare and actually win. Naruto took a bite of rice. The teacher was projecting modern sensibilities onto a 16th century text. The author's intent was more straightforward. "Right, of course," Kiba said, clearly out of his depth. He pivoted. "So, do you play any sports? With your reflexes, I bet you'd be amazing at kendo. We're always looking for new members for the club. I'm not much of a joiner." Naruto replied, his gaze neutral. He could feel Kiba's energy, a knight's aura, probing at his own, trying to find a chink in the armor. It was like a fly buzzing against a pane of glass. A few minutes later, Kiba excused himself, a frown of frustration on his handsome face. He was followed not long after by Akeno Himahima, who, accidentally, dropped her stack of student council papers near him, sending them fluttering across the rooftop. "Oh, clumsy me," she exclaimed, her voice a melodic chime. As she bent down to retrieve them, she gave him a view that had probably caused a dozen lesser men to faint. "Uzumaki-kun, you're always so alone up here. Don't you get lonely?" She reached for a paper near his foot, her fingers brushing against his leg. A jolt of her demonic energy, laced with the seductive power of a succubus, flowed into him. It was meant to charm, to enthrall, to lower his inhibitions. To Naruto, it felt like someone trying to start a forest fire with a damp match. His own life force, pure and overwhelming, simply neutralized her energy without him even having to think about it. He picked up the last paper and handed it to her, his expression unchanged. "I'm not alone. I'm just by myself. There's a difference." Akeno's smile didn't falter, but he saw a flicker of genuine shock in her eyes. She had used a significant amount of her power, and he hadn't reacted at all. She thanked him sweetly and departed, her swaying hips promising a retreat but not a surrender. Throughout the day, he felt Kaniko's presence. She never approached. She was just there. In the hallway, in the courtyard, a small, silent shadow watching him with wide, golden eyes. Her senses were trying to get a lock on him, to parse the scent of ozone and nothingness that clung to him like a shroud. He offered her no clues, his control over his own aura absolute. By the end of the school day, he knew a summons was coming. The threads of fate were buzzing, pulling taut in the direction of the old school building. As he was packing his bag, a prim, bespectacled girl from the student council, Sona Citri's queen, he recognized from the energy signature, approached his desk. Uzumaki-san, she said, her voice polite and businesslike. The president of the Occult Research Club requests your presence. Immediately, Naruto slung his bag over his shoulder. Lead the way. The walk to the old, ivy-covered building was silent. The air grew thick with demonic power, a deliberate display meant to intimidate. To Naruto, it just felt like the pressure change before a storm. He was, after all, the one who smelled of ozone. The club room was exactly as he'd pictured it. Opulent, gothic, and designed to project an aura of ancient power. Rias Gremory sat in a high-backed chair that was more of a throne, her peerage arranged around her like a royal court. She gestured to the plush sofa opposite her. Thank you for coming, Uzumaki-san, she said, her voice smooth and imperious. Please, have a seat. Akeno, would you be a dear and pour our guest some tea? Akeno did so, her movements graceful. Naruto ignored the tea. He remained standing. I'm not here for social pleasantries, Gremory-san, he said, his tone even. You didn't invite me here to discuss the weather. You've been trying to probe me all day. You're curious. You're suspicious. So, let's skip the theatrics. What do you want? His directness seemed to take them all by surprise. Rias's carefully constructed facade of casual authority cracked for a moment. She recovered quickly, a faint, condescending smile gracing her lips. Very well. You're direct. I can appreciate that, she said. You're right. I am curious. Last night, you displayed an ability that no human should possess. You walk through my territory as if you own it. So I ask you again, Naruto Uzumaki, what are you? I'm a transfer student, he replied flatly. Akeno giggled. He's a stubborn one, President. I am the heiress to the House of Gremory, Rias declared, letting her power flood the room. The pressure intensified tenfold, the very air seeming to solidify. Red and black demonic energy, the power of destruction, crackled around her like an aura. My peerage and I are devils. This town is my domain, granted to me by my father and my brother, the current Lucifer. Now, I will not ask again. Tell me who and what you are, or I will be forced to treat you as a hostile entity. Naruto stood in the epicenter of the pressure wave, his uniform ruffling slightly in the swirling energy, but his posture did not change. He was an unmovable rock in the middle of a raging river. You're devils, he acknowledged, his voice calm. I know. I've known since I first sensed you. You want to know what I am. He met her fiery gaze with his own serene blue. I'm the one who's going to tell you that your methods are flawed. Flawed, Rias repeated, her voice dripping with indignation. You rule through fear and intimidation. You see a power you don't understand and your first instinct is to either cage it or destroy it. You talk about responsibility, but you were late to that stray. You were reacting. You weren't protecting. We were on our way. Kiba interjected, stepping forward. We had the situation under control. You had a situation, Naruto corrected him. You didn't have control. Control is stopping the threat before it becomes a threat. Control is knowing what's in your territory. He looked back at Rias. You didn't know about me until I acted. That's a failure of intelligence. That's a flaw in your system. Every word was a calculated strike against her pride, her authority, her very identity as a king. The rage in her eyes was palpable. You arrogant. I have been trained to rule since the day I was born. I will not be lectured by some human child who stumbled into our world. Then don't be, Naruto said. But don't expect me to play by your rules. He finally looked at the tea Akeno had poured. And you should know, your attempt to poison this was amateurish. Akeno's smile finally vanished completely, replaced by a look of utter shock. The tea contained a potent magical sedative, designed to weaken a supernatural being enough for them to be subdued. He hadn't just resisted it, he had detected it without even looking. Rias stood up, her power flaring to its peak. That's it. You have disrespected my house, my peerage, and my authority for the last time. I was going to offer you a place among us. A chance at power, at eternal life. As my servant, she held up a crimson, chess piece-like object, a pawn evil piece. But now, I will simply take you. Naruto shook his head. You still don't get it. I don't serve. I have my own path. And it doesn't involve a collar, no matter how gilded it is. Then you leave me no choice, Rias snarled. Kiba, Kaneko, Subdue him. In a flash of impossible speed, Kiba was behind Naruto, a demonic sword appearing in his hand as he lunged. Simultaneously, Kaneko shot forward from the front, her small fist cocked back, radiating enough raw power to shatter a concrete wall. They were attacking a pincer, a classic knight and rook combination. It was over before it began. Naruto didn't turn. As Kiba's sword descended, he simply took a half step to the left. The blade hissed through the air where his neck had been. At the same time, he raised his right hand, palm open. To meet Kaneko's punch, there was no thunderous impact. No shockwave. When her fist met his palm, a soft blue light pulsed from his hand. All the kinetic energy, all the demonic force behind her blow, was simply absorbed. It vanished into him, leaving her fist resting harmlessly in his palm. Kaneko's eyes went wide with disbelief. She had hit him with the force of a speeding truck, and he hadn't even budged. He then twisted at the waist, using Kiba's own momentum against him. He grabbed the knight's wrist, redirecting the sword strike downwards into the floorboards. With a precise jab of 2 fingers to Kiba's elbow, he disrupted the flow of energy to the limb, causing the sword to clatter to the ground as Kiba's arm went numb. The entire exchange took less than a second. Both of her powerful pieces were neutralized without him throwing a single punch. "Don't," Naruto said, his voice dropping, carrying a weight that made the air feel cold. "Don't do that again." From across the room, Akeno's hands crackled with power. "Then how about a little divine punishment?" She purred, unleashing a bolt of yellow holy lightning, the power inherited from her fallen angel father. It was an attack that was anathema to devils, and should have been devastating to any other creature. The lightning bolt screamed across the room. Naruto released Kaneko and Kiba and turned to face it. He didn't erect a shield. He didn't dodge. He simply held up his left hand. The bolt struck his palm and grounded itself. The holy lightning, a power of divine judgment, flowed into him and dissipated into nothing. He didn't even seem to notice it. "Holy power has no effect on one who is in balance," he stated calmly, looking at the stunned Akeno. "You, on the other hand, you're a mess of contradictions. A devil wielding holy power. That kind of internal conflict must be exhausting." His words hit her like a physical blow. He saw not just her power, but the pain behind it. The core of her identity she kept hidden behind a teasing smile. Finally, Rias acted. "Enough," she roared, unleashing a massive sphere of the power of destruction. It was not a precise attack. It was a wave of pure annihilating energy, black and crimson, that tore across the room, disintegrating the sofa and rug as it came for him. Naruto stood his ground. He brought both hands together in front of him, fingers interlaced. The pale blue energy he'd used on the stray formed around him, not as a shield, but as a swirling vortex. The power of destruction slammed into the vortex and was contained. The roiling, chaotic energy was bent, redirected, and compressed into a small, unstable sphere that hovered in front of Naruto's hands. He was holding Rias's ultimate power in the palm of his hand, struggling against its nature, forcing it into a shape it didn't want to take. "This is your power," he said, his voice strained for the first time. "The power to erase, to unmake. It's so empty." With a final grunt of effort, he clenched his hands. The sphere of destructive energy imploded, snuffing itself out of existence with a muffled whump that shook the very foundations of the building. Silence. Rias and her peerage stood frozen, their minds unable to process what they had just witnessed. He had defeated their knight's speed, their rook's power, their queen's holy lightning, and her own signature power of destruction. He had taken everything they had and nullified it without taking a single step back. Who are you?" Rias whispered, the anger in her voice replaced by a chilling awe. Before Naruto could answer, the air in the center of the room shimmered with intense heat. A brilliant orange magic circle, emblazoned with the crest of a phoenix, erupted on the floor. Flames licked at the air as a figure emerged. He was a handsome young man with short blonde hair and an arrogant smirk that seemed permanently etched onto his face. He wore flamboyant, expensive cloth. Ingen radiated an aura of immense power, equal to, if not greater than, Rias's. "Rias, my darling, did you miss me?" the man crowed, his eyes sweeping the room before landing on her. "Riser has come." all the way from the underworld to see his beautiful fiancée. He strode towards Rias, ignoring everyone else in the room. This was Riser Phoenix, heir to the great house of Phoenix, and Rias's publicly announced fiancé. Rias's expression turned from awe to pure disgust. Riser, what are you doing here? This is my territory. You are not welcome. Nonsense. He boomed, laughing. He reached out and grabbed her arm, his grip possessive. Anywhere my beloved Rias is a place Riser belongs. We are to be married soon, after all. You should get used to my presence. Take your hand off me, Rias hissed, trying to pull away. But his grip was like iron. Naruto had remained silent, watching this new player with a detached curiosity. He felt no specific thread of fate connecting to this man, only a sense of wrongness. An obstacle. But when Riser laid his hand on Rias, when he ignored her clear command to let her go, something inside Naruto shifted. It wasn't a conscious thought. It wasn't a decision. It was an instinct. A fundamental truth of his existence asserting itself. The Harem King's will did not tolerate threats to those under its purview. The temperature in the room plummeted. The soft, ambient blue light that sometimes flickered around Naruto's hands now erupted from his entire body. It was not the chaotic energy of a devil or the sharp light of a holy being. It was an aura of pure, unadulterated sovereignty. It was the pressure of a true king, a pressure that made Rias's demonic intimidation feel like a child's tantrum. On the back of his right hand, the crest from the night before burned into existence. The crimson spiral, a symbol of life, passion, and endless potential, blazed at the center of a golden emblem representing absolute authority. It was not a symbol of a house or a faction. It was the symbol of a force of nature. Riser Phoenix, who had arrogantly ignored everyone, froze. He turned his head slowly, his eyes wide. The power rolling off Naruto was suffocating, ancient, and utterly terrifying. It was a power that the immortal, arrogant Phoenix had never encountered before. It felt primal. Naruto's blue eyes were no longer calm. They were blazing with a cold, focused fire. He took one step forward. The floorboards creaked under the weight of his presence alone. She told you to take your hand off her, Naruto said. His voice was quiet, but it echoed in the room, resonating in the very bones of everyone present. It was not a request. It was not a threat. It was a statement of fact. A command that reality itself would be forced to obey. Riser, for the first time in his life, felt a sliver of genuine fear. Chapter 2 End. Chapter 3. The Phoenix and the Spiral King. The pressure in the room was no longer just a display of demonic power, it had become a physical entity. It was the crushing weight of the deep ocean, the absolute zero of the void. Riser Phoenix, a being born of fire and pride, felt an instinctual cold that had nothing to do with temperature. His demonic senses screamed at him, a primal terror he hadn't felt since he was a fledgling, warning him that the creature standing before him was not prey. It was a predator of a higher order. His arrogance, however, was a fortress built over centuries. Fear was a flaw, and he, Riser Phoenix, was flawless. And who do you think you are? Riser sneered, forcing the bravado into his voice. He tightened his grip on Rias's arm, deliberately causing her to wince. This is a matter between two noble houses. A low-born creature like you has no right to even breathe the same air as us. Be gone. Before Riser decides to turn you to ash. The crimson spiral on Naruto's hand seemed to pulse, a slow, steady heartbeat of pure power. His eyes, fixed on Riser's hand gripping Rias's arm, narrowed into icy slits. He didn't answer with words. He answered with movement. He vanished. There was no burst of speed, no sound of displaced air. One moment he was standing 10 feet away, the next, he was directly in front of Riser. His right hand extended, fingers straight, aimed not at Riser's face or chest, but at his wrist. Riser's Phoenix physiology gave him reflexes that bordered on precognition. He saw the attack coming and reacted, summoning a vortex of orange flame to incinerate the boy before he could land the blow. It was an attack that could melt steel, an inferno that had erased countless enemies. The fire erupted, engulfing the space where Naruto was. But Naruto was no longer there. He had used the forward momentum of his initial step to pivot on the ball of his foot, flown around the gout of flame with an impossible, liquid grace. The heat washed over him, not even singeing the fabric of his uniform. His movement was so fluid it seemed as if he had anticipated the attack before Riser had even thought of it. Now at Riser's side, his hand strike changed into a grip. He seized Riser's wrist, the one holding Rias. His fingers, infused with that strange, serene blue energy, clamped down like a vice. Riser felt a shock, not of impact, but of negation. The demonic energy that constantly flowed through his body, fueling his strength and his flames, sputtered out in his arm as if a circuit had been cut. His grip on Rias vanished, his fingers going limp. Impossible, Riser snarled, swinging his other fist, wreathed in fire, in a wild haymaker. Naruto didn't even look at it. He pulled Riser forward, using the devil's own momentum against him, and spun, his leg sweeping out and hooking Riser's ankle. It was a simple, elegant trip that sent the mighty heir of Phoenix stumbling forward. At the same time, Naruto released Riser's wrist and brought the blade of his hand down in a sharp, precise chop on the back of his neck. There was a sickening crack. Riser Phoenix, the immortal phoenix, collapsed to the floor like a puppet with its strings cut. He was out cold. The room was plunged into an even deeper silence. Rias and her peerage stared, their minds reeling. Akeno's jaw was slightly agape. Kiba's hand, which had been creeping towards his sword, was frozen in place. Kaniko's eyes were wide, her chocolate bar forgotten. They had been prepared for a battle. A titanic struggle between two powerful beings. What they had witnessed was a dissection. It wasn't a fight, it was a masterclass in dominance. Rias rubbed her wrist where Riser had grabbed it, her gaze locked on Naruto's back. He hadn't unleashed a single wave of destructive power. He hadn't chanted a single spell. He had used pure skill, precision, and an unnerving understanding of how his opponent's body and energy worked. Kiba stammered, unable to finish the sentence. Neutralized him, Akeno finished, her voice a soft, awe-filled whisper. He didn't try to overpower him. He just turned him off. Their shock was premature. A low groan came from the floor. A faint orange glow began to emanate from Riser's body. The broken bone in his neck snapped back into place with a wet crunch. The glow intensified, coalescing into gentle flames that licked at his skin, healing the minor contusions and revitalizing his unconscious form. This was the legendary power of the Phoenix clan, unconditional immortality. Any wound, no matter how grievous, would be healed by their flames of regeneration. Within seconds, Riser was stirring, pushing himself up, his face a mask of incandescent rage. You dare strike me, he bellowed, his body exploding in a pillar of fire that sent furniture flying and cracked the ceiling. I am Riser Phoenix. I am immortal, I will burn you from existence until not even dust remains. He was no longer holding back. The full, unrestrained power of a high-class devil filled the room, a raging inferno of pride and fury. The flames he commanded were not mere fire. They were conceptual, a manifestation of his very being. Naruto simply watched him, his expression one of mild disappointment. Immortality, he said, his voice cutting through the roar of the flames. A power that encourages stagnation. You never had to learn. You never had to improve. You just had to outlast your enemies. It's made you sloppy. Sloppy. Riser shrieked, unleashing a torrent of fire. A massive wave that surged across the room to swallow Naruto whole. Rias screamed his name, a raw, instinctual cry of warning. Kiba and Kaneko braced themselves for the impact, preparing to defend their king. Naruto did not move to dodge. He simply raised his right hand, the crimson spiral on its back now blazing with the light of a miniature sun. He met the tidal wave of fire with his open palm. The result was not an explosion. It was an absorption. The Phoenix flames, a force of nature in their own right, slammed against an invisible wall inches from his palm. But it was more than a wall. The flames were being drawn in. They swirled, compressed, and were pulled into the spiral on his hand, vanishing without a trace. The entire, room-clearing inferno was consumed in less than 3 seconds. Leaving behind nothing but a lingering smell of brimstone and the sight of Naruto standing completely unharmed, his hand still outstretched. Riser's rage faltered, replaced by a gaping, horrified disbelief. My flames. He ate my flames. Your energy is chaotic, unfocused, Naruto said, lowering his hand. The blue aura around him intensified, a stark contrast to Riser's violent orange. It's all power, no control. All heat, no substance. Let me show you what real control looks like. He took a step forward. Riser, acting on pure instinct, sent out a dozen flaming projectiles. Phoenix-shaped birds of fire that homed in on Naruto from all angles. Naruto flowed through them. He moved with a preternatural grace that defied physics. He weaved, ducked, and sidestepped each fiery bird, sometimes by a mere fraction of an inch. He wasn't just dodging. He was moving in such a way that the projectiles were tricked into colliding with each other, erupting in harmless showers of sparks. He closed the distance to Riser in seconds, his path a mesmerizing, impossible dance through a storm of fire. He appeared before the terrified Phoenix heir, his left hand glowing with that same placid blue light. You rely on your regeneration, Naruto said, his voice a low whisper. You believe you can't be put down because your body will always heal. He jabbed his fingers forward, striking Riser's chest. It was not a powerful blow. It was a precise tap, aimed directly over Riser's heart. The blue energy pulsed, flowing into Riser's body. Riser stumbled back, clutching his chest. A look of confusion on his face. What was that? Did you think a pathetic little love tap would? He stopped, his eyes widening in horror. He couldn't feel it. The constant, familiar warmth of his regenerative flames. The inner fire that was the very core of his being, was gone. It felt like a pilot light had been snuffed out inside his soul. He looked down at his hands, trying to summon his fire, but nothing happened. He was cut off from his own power. What did you do to me? He stammered, the terror in his voice now naked and raw. Your regeneration isn't magic. It's a biological process fueled by your demonic energy, Naruto explained, his voice clinical. I just severed the connection. I didn't stop your power. I just stopped your ability to use it. Your body no longer recognizes the command to heal. He stepped forward again. Riser scrambled back, falling over a piece of broken table. For the first time, he was vulnerable. For the first time, he was mortal. The fortress of his pride had crumbled, leaving behind a terrified, powerless child. Stay away from me, he shrieked, throwing a piece of debris at Naruto. Naruto deflected it with a casual wave of his hand. He stood over the cowering Phoenix, his shadow falling across him. You came into her home, he said, his voice cold. You laid your hands on her against her will. You threatened her and her friends. You disrespected her authority. He knelt, bringing his face level with Riser's. His blue eyes seemed to pierce through Riser's very soul. You seem to be under the impression that your noble B. Earth gives you the right to do whatever you want. I am here to correct that misconception. He drew back his fist. Wait, please, Riser begged, tears of fear and humiliation streaming down his face. I am Riser Phoenix, my father. Naruto's punch was not fast. It was deliberate. It connected with Riser's jaw with a sickening crunch of breaking bone. The heir to the house of Phoenix went limp, his eyes rolling back into his head. This time, there was no orange glow. There was no miraculous healing. There was only the broken, unconscious form of a devil who had just learned the meaning of consequence. Naruto stood up, shaking his hand slightly. He looked at the unconscious Riser with something akin to pity. All that power, he murmured. And you never learned a thing. He turned to face Rias and her peerage. They looked at him as if he were a god who had just descended from the heavens. The fear, the awe, the utter disbelief was a palpable thing in the ruined room. Before anyone could speak, the air grew cold and still. A silver and gray magic circle, emblazoned with the crest of the House of Baal, materialized on the floor. From it emerged a woman in a French maid's outfit, her hair braided and her expression as cold and impassive as a frozen lake. She was Graphia Lucifuge, the silver-haired queen of annihilation, the wife of Searsex Lucifer and the strongest queen in the underworld. Her gaze swept the room, taking in the destruction, the stunned Gremory peerage, the unconscious form of Riser Phoenix, and finally, settling on Naruto. Her eyes, which normally showed no emotion, widened almost imperceptibly. She could feel the lingering traces of his power, an energy signature completely alien to her vast experience. Lady Rias, Graphia said, her voice a calm, melodic chime that held an underlying core of steel. Lord Lucifer sensed a massive surge of power from this location, followed by the near extinguishing of Lord Riser's energy signature. Please, explain what has happened here. Rias, shaken from her stupor by the formal address, struggled to find her voice. Graphia, Riser, he came unannounced. He was being forceful. She looked from the broken form of her fiancé to the calm figure of her defender. How could she possibly explain what had happened? Graphia's gaze remained fixed on Naruto. And you, she said, her tone shifting. It was not accusatory, but it was intensely analytical. I do not recognize your energy. You are not a member of the Gremory peerage. Who are you? Naruto met the gaze of the underworld's strongest queen without flinching. My name is Naruto Uzumaki. And what is it you did to Lord Riser? She pressed. His life force is stable, but his connection to his family's trait has been locked. Such a thing should be impossible. He was a threat, Naruto said simply, offering no further explanation. Graphia was silent for a long moment, her mind clearly processing the situation with incredible speed. She looked at Rias's bruised wrist, at the defiant but protective way her peerage had positioned themselves slightly behind Naruto, and at the utter lack of arrogance or malice in Naruto's stance. Lord Riser's intrusion was unsanctioned, she stated finally, a formal judgment in her tone. His actions, as I can surmise them, were a dishonor to both his house and the agreement with the House of Gremory. She gave Rias a pointed look. However, the fact remains that a high-class devil, an heir to a great house, has been assaulted and his power sealed by an unknown entity. She turned her full attention back to Naruto. My lord, Seer's ex Lucifer, will hear of this. He will want to meet the one capable of silencing a Phoenix. It was not a threat. It was a statement of inevitable fact. A royal summons. Quote, you have drawn the eye of the great Satan, Naruto Uzumaki. I suggest you prepare yourself for the consequences. With a flick of her wrist, another magic circle enveloped the unconscious Riser. He vanished, presumably sent back to the underworld for medical attention. Lady Rias, I will report that you and your peerage successfully defended yourselves from a belligerent fiancé, Graphia said, her words a carefully crafted political statement that both protected Rias and acknowledged the incident. The details of how you defended yourselves, I will leave that for you to explain to your brother. With a final, lingering look at Naruto, a look that held 1,000 unanswered questions, Graphia Lucifuge stepped back into her magic circle and vanished. The room was quiet again, the tension of battle and political confrontation slowly receding, leaving behind a thick, awkward silence. Rias Gremory looked at the boy standing in the middle of her wrecked club room. He had defied her, dismantled her peerage's attacks, rejected her offer of servitude, and then proceeded to effortlessly defeat her nigh-invincible, high-class fiancé to protect her honor. Her entire world had been turned on its axis in the span of a single afternoon. The pieces of her life, her future, her understanding of power, were scattered on the floor like the debris around them. And at the center of it all was the quiet, enigmatic transfer student who smelled like the coming storm. Naruto, she said, his name feeling strange and new on her tongue. Why? He turned to her, the immense, terrifying pressure of his aura receding, replaced by that unnerving calm. The blazing crest on his hand faded, becoming nothing more than skin once more. He was hurting you, Naruto said, as if it were the simplest, most obvious reason in the world. He looked at her, and for the first time, she saw something beyond power and confidence in his eyes. It was a profound, unshakable certainty, a sense of purpose that seemed as old as the stars. There are certain things in this world that I am bound to protect, he said. And you, Rias Gremory, are one of them. Chapter 3 End. Chapter 4. The Crimson Satan's Test. The silence that followed Graphia's departure was heavier than any pressure that had filled the room before. It was a vacuum, hollowed out by the force of revelation and the sheer impossibility of the events that had transpired. The wrecked club room was a testament to a battle that had felt more like an execution, and at its center stood Naruto Uzumaki, no longer just a transfer student, but a force of nature wearing a school uniform. Rias Gremory stared at him, his final words echoing in her mind. There are certain things in this world that I am bound to protect. And you, Rias Gremory, are one of them. It was a declaration so absolute, so devoid of arrogance or condition, that it bypassed all of her noble pride and struck directly at the core of her being. It wasn't a flirtatious line or a knight's pledge of fealty. It was stated as a fundamental law of the universe, as undeniable as gravity. Akeno was the first to recover, a soft, amazed laugh escaping her lips. My, she breathed, fanning her face with her hand. To think, all this time we were worried about a stray cat, and it turns out we found a dragon. She looked at the destruction around them. Well, it seems the club room is in need of a serious renovation. I suppose that's as good an excuse as any to get new curtains. Her attempt to normalize the situation was a welcome, if fragile, anchor. Kiba let out a long, slow breath, his hand finally dropping from the hilt of his sword. He looked at Naruto not with suspicion, but with a warrior's deep, profound respect. The way you moved, the way you dismantled him, I have never seen anything like it. Kaneko, who had retrieved her dropped chocolate bar, simply nodded, her golden eyes fixed on Naruto. He's strong, she said. It was the highest praise she could offer, and it carried the weight of an unshakable truth. Rias took a step forward, her ruby eyes searching his placid blue ones. What did you mean? She asked, her voice softer than she intended. Bound to protect me, why? Naruto's gaze was direct, unwavering. There are connections in this world, Gremory-san. Fates that are intertwined. Ours is one such connection. I didn't seek it out, and I don't expect you to understand it yet. But it is my truth, and it is my purpose. He wouldn't speak of sacred gears or divine mandates. Such words were meaningless without context. He would show them, through action, what he meant. Before Rias could press him further, the air rippled once more. The silver and gray crest of Baal flared to life, and Graphia Lucifuge reappeared. Her expression was as impassive as before, but her posture was rigid, official. The brief respite was over. Naruto Uzumaki, she announced, her voice resonating with the authority of the one she served. My master, Lord Searsex Lucifer, requests your presence in the underworld. Immediately, the weight of that name settled over the room. Searsex Lucifer, one of the four great Satans, the ruler of all devils and, more importantly to Rias, her beloved older brother. A summons from him was not a request, it was a command that could shake the foundations of the underworld. Rias immediately stepped forward, placing herself slightly in front of Naruto. My brother wishes to see him. Then I will accompany him. This happened in my territory, under my watch. I will take full responsibility. Graphia's silver eyes flickered towards Rias. Your presence is expected, Lady Rias. However, the summons was for him. Naruto gave Rias a reassuring glance before nodding to Graphia. I'll go. His acceptance was so quick, so devoid of fear or hesitation, that it once again took them by surprise. He was being summoned by the most powerful devil in existence, and he treated it with the same nonchalance as being called to the principal's office. I am not letting you go alone, Rias insisted, her voice firm. This was no longer just about her territory. It was personal. He had defended her. She would now stand with him. Graphia did not argue. With a graceful wave of her hand, the teleportation circle expanded to envelop them all, Naruto, Rias, and her entire peerage. The world dissolved in a swirl of silver light and shadow. The transition was disorienting, a feeling of being pulled apart and reassembled molecule by molecule. When reality solidified, it was to a scene of breathtaking, alien beauty. They stood on a balcony of polished obsidian, overlooking a vast, sprawling city of Gothic spires and crimson towers. The sky was a permanent, twilight purple, illuminated not by a sun, but by two ethereal moons, one silver and one blue, that cast long, haunting shadows. The air itself thrummed with a palpable energy, the raw, undiluted essence of demonic power. This was the Gremory domain, the heart of Rias's ancestral home. Naruto took it all in with a calm, analytical gaze. He could feel the pulse of this realm, a rhythm so different from the natural energy of the human world. It was a world of ambition, of passion, of raw, untamed power given form. And yet, as he stood there, taking his first breath of underworld air, he felt it again. A pinprick, a cold, sterile, impossibly distant sensation, like the gas of a surgeon's lamp from across the cosmos. The divine observer. Here, in a realm saturated with the demonic, its alien presence was sharper, clearer. It felt analytical, curious, as if his very PR essence in this dimension was an unexpected variable in a grand equation. This way, Grafia instructed, her voice pulling him from his thoughts. She led them through cavernous halls of marble and porphyry, past portraits of stern-looking Gremory ancestors whose eyes seemed to follow them. They did not stop at a throne room, but at a pair of large, ornate wooden doors. Grafia pushed them open to reveal not a court, but a spacious, comfortable office. A massive fireplace crackled at one end, and bookshelves filled with ancient tomes lined the walls. Behind a large, mahogany desk sat a man with long, crimson hair that flowed like a river of blood, the same shade as Rias's. He wore a calm, friendly smile, but his eyes, a deep, penetrating violet, held an ocean of power that made the very air around him bend to his will. This was Sirzek's Lucifer, the Crimson Satan. "Rias," he said, his voice warm and filled with genuine affection. "I'm glad you're safe, brother," Rias replied, giving a slight bow. Sirzek's smile remained, but his gaze shifted to Naruto. The temperature in the room seemed to drop by 20 degrees. The friendly warmth vanished, replaced by an intensity so profound it felt like a physical weight. It was the authority of a king who had fought in and won a civil war, a being whose power could erase civilizations. "Grafia, Akeno, Kiba, Kaneko, if you would be so kind as to wait outside," Sirzek said. His tone pleasant but leaving no room for argument. "Rias, you may stay. I wish to speak with our guest." Once the door clicked shut, leaving only the four of them, Sirzek steepled his fingers. His violet eyes fixed on Naruto. "Riser Phoenix is recovering," he began, his voice deceptively casual. "His family is, to put it mildly, incandescent with rage. However, my wife's report suggests Riser was the aggressor. That he laid his hands on my sister against her will." His gaze sharpened. "And you, Naruto Uzumaki, a complete unknown, intervened. You did not just defeat him. You sealed his power, an ability that, until today, was considered a conceptual absolute. So, I will be as direct as you were with my sister. Who are you, and what gives you the right to interfere in the affairs of my family?" Rias opened her mouth to speak, to defend him, but Naruto subtly raised a hand, stopping her. He met the great Satan's gaze, not as a subordinate, but as an equal. "My name is Naruto Uzumaki," he said, his voice as calm as it had been in the club room. "As for my right, I saw someone in distress, being assaulted by a man who refused to take no for an answer. The right to stop that is not granted by bloodlines or titles. It's universal." Sirzek's eyebrows rose slightly. The boy had nerve, a noble sentiment, but the world we live in is not governed by sentiment. It is governed by power. And you have displayed a power that has the entire underworld scrambling for information. He leaned forward, the pressure in the room intensifying. "You neutralized my sister's peerage. You contained her power of destruction. And then you did the impossible to a Phoenix. You are not human." "It was not a question. I am what I need to be," Naruto replied. Sirzek smiled, a thin, dangerous expression, a cryptic answer. "I dislike mysteries, Uzumaki-san. Especially when they involve my little sister's safety." He stood up, and the room itself seemed to groan under the sheer density of his aura. "You seem to believe you are Rias's protector. A bold claim. Show me." He raised his hand, and a sphere of energy materialized in his palm. It was crimson and black, like Rias's. But it was on an entirely different scale. It was not a chaotic ball of destructive energy. It was a perfect sphere, small as a marble, of pure, compressed annihilation. It was the concept of non-existence given form. It was beautiful and utterly terrifying. "My sister inherited a fraction of our mother's power of destruction," Sirzek said softly. "I, on the other hand, am a true master of it." With a flick of his wrist, he didn't throw the sphere. He released it. It shot across the room, not with speed, but with an inexorable certainty. It did not tear the air, it unmade the space it passed through, leaving a trail of shimmering nothingness in its wake. Rias gasped, her instinct screaming. This was not a test, it was a death sentence. Naruto didn't flinch. He didn't erect a shield or try to dodge. He stepped forward, placing himself directly in its path. The crimson spiral blazed to life on his hand, but he didn't try to absorb this power. He knew, instinctively, that this was something too pure, too absolute to be consumed. Instead, he brought both hands up, his palms facing each other on either side of the sphere's path. A serene, azure-blue energy flowed from him, forming a conduit between his hands. He did not intend to block the power of destruction. He intended to guide it. The sphere of annihilation entered the conduit. Time seemed to slow. The chaotic, destructive nature of the energy raged against the calm, controlling nature of Naruto's aura. It was like trying to gentle a supernova. The veins in Naruto's arms stood out, his muscles straining under an unimaginable pressure. He was not fighting the power. He was communicating with it. He was feeling its nature, understanding its purpose, to return all things to nothing, and he was offering it a different path. With a great roar of effort that was torn from his very soul, he began to reshape it. The roaring crimson and black of the sphere began to calm. The concept of annihilation was being overridden by a concept of potential. He wasn't destroying it, he was transforming it. The sphere of nothingness began to glow with a brilliant white light. The destructive energy was unmade, its purpose reversed, until it was nothing but pure, raw, untainted energy. And then, with a final, shuddering breath, Naruto clapped his hands together. The white sphere dissolved, dissipating into the room as a gentle shower of harmless, glittering particles that felt like warm snowflakes. The trail of nothingness it had left in its wake slowly knitted itself back together, reality repairing the wound. Naruto stood there, breathing heavily, sweat beading on his brow. It had taken nearly everything he had. Silence. Rias was staring, her heart pounding in her chest. She had just witnessed a miracle. Her brother's power, the ultimate expression of erasure, had been tamed. It had been pacified. Sears X Lucifer stood behind his desk, his calm, smiling mask completely gone. His violet eyes were wide with a combination of shock, disbelief, and a dawning, brilliant respect. He had seen thousands of battles, wielded power that could shatter dimensions, but he had never, in all his long life, seen anything like that. Incredible, Sears X breathed, the word a reverent whisper. He slowly sat back down in his chair, the crushing pressure of his aura completely gone. He looked at Naruto not as a potential threat, but as something new, something that had just rewritten the rules of what was possible. He began to laugh. It started as a low chuckle and grew into a full, booming laugh of genuine delight. To think after all these centuries, I would see something truly new. You didn't block it, you didn't destroy it, you healed it. He looked at his sister, who was still staring at Naruto with an unreadable expression. Rias, it seems you have found yourself the most interesting man in the entire cosmos. He turned back to Naruto, his expression now serious but warm. I do not know what you are, Naruto Uzumaki, and for now, I will not press. But I know what you are not. You are not a threat to my sister. He leaned back, his smile returning, friendly and genuine this time. You have my respect, and, it seems, my gratitude. You have also created a monumental political headache with the Phoenix clan, but we will deal with that when the time comes. He stood and walked around the desk, stopping in front of Naruto. Protect my sister. It seems you are uniquely qualified for the task. It was not a command. It was a request, from one powerful being to another. I will, Naruto said, his breathing finally returning to normal. Good, Sears X said. Rias, I need to speak with you alone about the political fallout. Gremory will escort Naruto back to the human world. As Naruto turned to leave, Sears X placed a hand on his shoulder. One last thing, the Crimson Satan said, his voice low. Whatever power you hold, it shines like a beacon. Be careful who, or what, notices it. The warning was clear. His display of power had not gone unnoticed. As Gremory's teleportation circle enveloped him, Naruto's eyes met Rias's across the room. Her expression was a complex mixture of gratitude, awe, and a deep, burgeoning curiosity that went far beyond mere suspicion. For the first time, she wasn't looking at an anomaly or a rival. She was looking at him, Naruto, and seeing a protector. An ally, perhaps, something more. He reappeared in the familiar, wrecked space of the Occult Research Club room. He was alone. The energy of the underworld clung to him, a faint, exotic scent. He could still feel the phantom strain in his muscles from taming the power of destruction. He had faced down the most powerful devil in existence and earned his respect. He had solidified his place at Rias's side. But Searsex's warning echoed in his mind. Be careful who notices. He closed his eyes and reached out with his senses. And he felt it. The gaze. It was no longer distant and passive. It was focused, intent. His actions in the seat of demonic power had amplified the signal, turning a faint whisper into a clear, cold broadcast. The observer was no longer just watching. It was waiting. Chapter 4 End. Chapter 5. The Angel in the Garden. The Occult Research Club room was healing. Under Akeno's surprisingly meticulous guidance, a team of imp-like familiars swarmed the space. Their demonic magic knitting wood back together, reweaving the scorched fabric of the curtains, and polishing the claw marks from the floorboards. The physical damage was easy to repair. The psychic shockwave that had ripped through the Gremory peerage, however, was a far more complex wound to mend. The dynamic had irrevocably shifted. The hierarchy, once as solid as the Gremory crest, had been fractured. Rias was still their king, the object of their loyalty and affection, but there was a new gravitational center in their orbit, one who held his position not by title or force, but by the quiet, unshakable gravity of his own existence. Naruto was now a constant presence. He never asked to join, and Rias never formally offered. He was simply there. After school, he would walk with them to the old school building. A silent guardian in their midst. He would sit on the newly repaired sofa, reading one of the club's many arcane texts, his presence a silent counterpoint to the thrum of their demonic energy. Suspicion had been replaced by voracious curiosity. Kiba was the most direct. He would approach Naruto in the Kendo Club dojo after hours, a practice sword in hand. Show me, he'd said the first time. His voice filled with a swordsman's earnest plea. Not how to fight like you, but how you see. You didn't watch Riser's attacks. You felt where they were going to be. Naruto, holding a simple wooden bakken, would oblige. He didn't teach Kiba forms or techniques. He taught him stillness. Stop trying to overwhelm your opponent, he explained, easily deflecting one of Kiba's lightning-fast strikes. Your speed is a weapon, but you use it like a club. Be a river, not a flood. Feel the flow of his energy, his intent. And then, be the rock that is already in its path. He would then tap Kiba's wrist with just enough force to make his grip falter, a perfect demonstration of minimum effort for maximum effect. Kiba, a prodigy of the sword, felt like a novice all over again. But it was a feeling filled with exhilarating potential, not frustration. Akeno's approach was, predictably, more subtle and infinitely more dangerous. She would bring him tea, unpoisoned, this time, and sit beside him. Her smile as enigmatic as ever. You saw right through me, didn't you, Uzumaki-kun? She purred one afternoon, her violet eyes searching his. You called me a mess of contradictions. Naruto didn't look up from his book. I called it what it is. You hate the fallen angel part of you, so you embrace the devil's side with everything you have. But you still wield your father's power. You use holy lightning, a power that hurts you as much as your enemies, as a form of self-punishment. He turned a page. It's a lot of effort just to prove a point to a man who isn't here. The teasing smile on Akeno's face didn't just vanish, it shattered. For a heartbeat, she looked completely exposed, a raw nerve of pain and anger laid bare. He hadn't just analyzed her power, he had read the story of her life in it. She quickly composed herself, but the mask was different now. When she looked at him, the seductive queen was gone, replaced by a woman seeing someone who understood the weight of her crown of thorns. Even Kaneko, the silent shadow, began to change. One afternoon, Naruto sat down on the grass outside the club, watching the sunset. He pulled a small, orange-colored mochi from his bag. Without a word, he split it in two and held one half out to Kaneko, who had appeared beside him as if from the very air. She hesitated, then took it, her golden eyes wide. They ate in comfortable silence, watching the sky bleed from orange to purple. He didn't ask her about her power or her past. He just shared his snack. To Kaneko, who had been treated as either a pet or a weapon for most of her life. This simple, human act of sharing was more profound than any pledge of alliance. Through it all, Rias watched. She was adrift in a sea of conflicting emotions. Gratitude for his protection, frustration at his quiet usurpation of the dynamic, and a deep, undeniable pull towards him that had nothing to do with politics or power. She was the king. She was in command. Yet, in his presence, she felt a sense of safety, of stability, that she had never known. It was infuriating. It was intoxicating. She was struggling with this new, complex reality when the next piece was placed on the board. He arrived on a Monday. A new transfer student, announced in homeroom as Zerachiel Elion. He was handsome, with hair the color of pale moonlight and eyes the shade of a winter sky. He carried himself with a serene, gentle charisma that was instantly magnetic. Where Naruto was a quiet void, Zerachiel was a tranquil, sunlit garden. He smiled often, his voice was calm and melodic, and within a day, he was one of the most popular students in school. Naruto felt him the moment he stepped onto the school grounds. It was the gaze, the cold, sterile, analytical presence that had been watching him from the heavens was now here, on earth, walking the same halls. It was perfectly shielded, cloaked in an aura of such profound goodness and purity that it would register to any demonic sense as a devout, but ultimately normal, human. But to Naruto, whose senses were attuned to the very fabric of life force, it was like a perfectly sanitized operating theater set up in the middle of a vibrant forest. It was an absence of life disguised as benevolent light. The Gremory peerage felt it too, though they couldn't articulate it. He feels too clean, Kaneko murmured during lunch, watching Zerachiel hold court with a group of admiring students. Era, he certainly has a divine air about him, Akeno commented, though her smile was tight. The fallen angel blood in her veins recoiled from Zerachiel's presence. It wasn't the aggressive burn of a church or a holy sword, it was the passive, suffocating pressure of a place where things like her were not meant to exist. Inevitably, the garden sought out the storm. Zerachiel appeared at the door of the Occult Research Club room that afternoon, a pleasant, inquisitive smile on his face. "Excuse me," he said, his voice like gentle chimes. "I was told this club deals with the unusual. I have a keen interest in folklore and mythology. I was hoping I might learn something." Rias, ever the proper club president, put on her best smile. "Of course. Please, come in." Zerachiel stepped inside, his pale eyes sweeping the room, taking in the demonic architecture, the faint traces of power, before landing, with laser-like precision, on Naruto. The smile never wavered. "Thank you for your hospitality," he said, giving a slight bow. "It's a pleasure to meet you all." His presence changed the atmosphere. It was subtle, the comfortable demonic hum of the club room felt muted, stifled, as if a neutralizing agent had been introduced into the air. "So," Zerachiel began, his gaze moving between Rias and Naruto. "You explore the mysteries of the world. A noble pursuit. Tell me, what is your opinion on destiny? Do you believe some beings are fated for greatness, to gather others to their cause, whether they wish it or not?" The question was seemingly philosophical, but Naruto heard the razor's edge beneath it. It was a direct, pointed inquiry into the nature of his sacred gear. "Destiny is just an excuse for those who want power, or an apology for those who have none," Naruto replied, his voice flat. "A person's will is what matters." Zerachiel's smile widened slightly, an interesting perspective. "And what of power itself? In your research," he said, now looking at Rias, "have you encountered tales of power so great it unbalances the world? A power that, by its very nature, is a flaw in the grand design. A corruption that must be corrected." Quote, every word was a carefully chosen dart. Flaw, corruption, corrected. He was talking about them. About devils. And about whatever Naruto was. Before Rias could formulate a political, non-committal answer, a flare of ugly, chaotic energy erupted on the holographic map. It was in the downtown shopping district, a place crowded with humans. "Astray," Kiba said, already on his feet. "It's moving fast," Akeno added, her expression hardening. Rias didn't hesitate. "We're going." She looked at Zerachiel. "I'm afraid we have to cut this short. Club business." "Of course," Zerachiel said, his smile serene. "Perhaps I could walk with you. I was heading in that direction anyway." It was not a request he could be easily denied without revealing their true nature. Rias reluctantly agreed. and they left the club room, walking quickly towards the site. They found the stray in a back alley. It was a disgusting creature, a centipede-like devil with a human torso. And it had cornered a group of terrified teenagers. Akeno, Kiba, Kaneko, you know what to do, Rias commanded, preparing to deploy her peerage. But before they could move, Zerachiel stepped forward. Allow me, he said, his voice still gentle, but now holding an undertone of chilling finality. One must not allow such filth to fester. He raised a hand. There was no magic circle, no incantation. A shaft of pure, white-hot light descended from the heavens, striking the stray devil. It was not the holy lightning Akeno used, tinged with her own energy. This was raw, unadulterated divine power, absolute and merciless. The stray didn't even have time to scream. It was not just killed, it was obliterated, vaporized. The light was so intense it scoured the brick wall behind the creature, leaving a bleached, glass-like crater. The wave of force threw the cornered teenagers against the opposite wall, and the sheer heat of the blast sent a shockwave of scorching air down the alley. The attack was brutally, terrifyingly efficient, and utterly without control. Zerachiel lowered his hand, the serene smile back on his face as if he had just performed a minor act of charity. The Gremory peerage was frozen in shock. They had just witnessed a holy attack more powerful than anything they had ever seen, unleashed by a boy who claimed to be human. Naruto, however, was not looking at the crater. He was looking at the teenagers, one of whom had a nasty gash on her forehead from being thrown against the wall. He moved to them, his hands glowing with a soft, green energy, a simple healing tekken. IQ to mend the cut and calm their frantic heartbeats. He stood up and turned to face Zerachiel. The calm, almost lazy demeanor he usually wore was gone. His blue eyes were as cold and hard as glacial ice. There were civilians here, Naruto said, his voice dangerously low. Your attack was reckless. You could have killed them. Zerachiel tilted his head, his expression one of placid confusion. They are safe. The impurity has been purged. Is that not a successful outcome? You caused collateral damage. You hurt an innocent person, Naruto countered, his voice rising. You had the power to contain it, to be precise. But you chose overwhelming force. Why? Zerachiel's smile was beatific, but his eyes were utterly devoid of warmth. They were the eyes of a judge, a fanatic. When you are scouring a disease, you do not worry about the comfort of the afflicted tissue, he said, his voice losing its gentle edge, replaced by the ringing certainty of zealotry. Devils are a disease, a flaw in creation. They must be purged, utterly, without mercy or hesitation. To show compassion for the unholy is the greatest of sins. He looked directly at Naruto, a silent challenge passing between them. Your methods are compromised. Uzumaki-san, you neutralize, you contain. You show mercy to that which is flawed. That is not strength. It is a weakness that will poison everything you try to protect. He had laid his cards on the table. He wasn't just an observer. He was an executioner, an agent of a power that saw no shades of gray, only the pure and the impure. And everyone standing in that alley, save for him, was on the wrong side of that line. Naruto stared at him, a cold realization dawning. This was the true enemy. Not a rival for territory or a political foe like Riser. This was an ideological opposite. A being who believed Naruto's core philosophy of balance and control was a damnable heresy. The divine observer was no longer just watching from the heavens. It had sent its angel to walk among them. And he had just declared war. Chapter 5 End. Chapter 6. The Doctrine of Purity. The silence in the alley was a physical thing, thick and suffocating. The bleached crater on the wall radiated a faint, sterile heat. A scar of holy power that felt utterly alien in the grimy, urban space. The teenagers Naruto had healed were staring, their minds unable to process the sequence of a monster, a flash of light. And the quiet, intense confrontation now taking place. Rias and her peerage were paralyzed, caught between the instinct to fight and the chilling realization of what they were facing. This was no mere exorcist. The sheer, unadulterated power Zerachiel had unleashed was on a level they had only read about in ancient texts. He was an angel, a direct agent of heaven, and he had just declared their very existence an impurity. Your definition of success is flawed, Naruto said, his voice dangerously calm. He took a half step, subtly positioning himself to shield the Gremory peerage from Zerachiel's direct line of sight. It was a gesture of pure, instinctual protection, and every devil in the alley recognized it as such. Success is protecting everyone, not just eliminating the threat, but ensuring the safety of those caught in the crossfire. You failed. Zerachiel's beatific smile didn't waver, but the light in his pale eyes grew colder, harder. It was the placable certainty of a celestial body following its prescribed orbit. The mortal form is transient, a temporary vessel. Their spiritual purity is what matters. To be touched by the light of heaven, even in such a concussive fashion, is a blessing that cleanses the soul. They should be grateful. The sheer, breathtaking arrogance of the statement stunned even Rias. This was a being so disconnected from the value of individual life, so consumed by his grand design, that he viewed near-lethal collateral damage as a spiritual gift. That's enough, Rias said, finding her voice. It was infused with the authority of the House of Gremory, a king reclaiming her court. You have trespassed in my territory, and while you may have eliminated a stray, your methods are unacceptable. Leave, now. Zerachiel's gaze shifted to her, and for the first time, a flicker of something other than serene judgment appeared, pity. The crimson heiress of Gremory, a being of profound impurity, yet you mimic the structures of order and responsibility. A fascinating perversion. He shook his head slowly. You do not give orders here, child of shadow. You are a symptom of a disease that is about to be cured. His focus returned to Naruto. And you are the most fascinating symptom of all. You possess a power that should be a beacon of order, a will that could impose a perfect design. Yet you use it to coddle the flawed, to protect the corrupt. This destiny you follow, he said, his voice dropping, laced with contempt. This compulsion to gather the broken and the damned, it is not a strength. It is a cancer, a collection of errors that weakens the fabric of creation. He was talking about them. About Rias, Akeno, Koba, Kaneko. He was calling them errors. A low growl emanated from Kaneko's throat. Kiba's hand was now firmly on the hilt of his sword, his knuckles white. Akeno's smile was gone, replaced by a mask of cold fury, tendrils of demonic and holy lightning crackling at her fingertips. You speak of purity, Naruto countered, his voice like the grinding of tectonic plates. But your words are filled with hatred. You speak of a grand design, but your actions create fear and pain. There is no light in your power. It is just a sterile, empty fire. The light cleanses, Zerachiel stated, as if reciting a sacred text. The fire purifies. That is its purpose. That is its beauty. He took a step back, the tension in the alley reaching its breaking point. He had no intention of fighting them, not here, not now. This was a declaration of principles, a psychological strike before the true battle began. A cleansing is coming to this town, Naruto Uzumaki, the angel said, his voice ringing with prophetic finality. The pieces are already in motion. The grand design will not tolerate such a nest of corruption to fester, especially not around a power as significant as yours. You will have to make a choice. Stand with the errors of the past and be erased with them, or embrace the perfection of the future and fulfill your true purpose as an agent of order. Without another word, he turned. He didn't teleport or vanish in a flash of light. He simply walked away, melting into the evening crowds as if he were just another student heading home. The oppressive, holy pressure vanished with him, leaving behind a profound and chilling silence. For a long moment, no one moved. Then, Naruto turned and knelt before the still dazed teenagers. Go home, he said, his voice now gentle. There was a gas leak. A minor explosion. You were lucky. You won't remember any of this clearly. He placed a hand on each of their foreheads, and a soft, calming energy flowed into them, clouding their memories of the monster and the divine light, leaving only a vague recollection of an accident. They scrambled to their feet and fled, casting confused looks back at the alley. With the civilians gone, the facade of control crumbled. What was that? Kiba asked, his voice strained. No exorcist has that kind of power. He's a seraph. Or something close to it. He called us errors, Kaneko whispered, her small fists clenched. Akeno was staring at the bleached crater, her expression a mixture of fear and a deep, familiar self-loathing. Zerachiel's doctrine of purity was the very philosophy that had condemned her as a child, that had made her an outcast to both devils and angels. To hear it spoken with such absolute conviction, backed by such overwhelming power, was like having an old wound torn open. Rias looked at her shaken peerage, then at the silent, grim-faced boy who had once again placed himself between them and destruction. The political games with Riser Phoenix seemed like a child's spat in comparison. This was a war of extinction, and they were on the wrong side of the divine sword. Back to the club room, she commanded, her voice tight with suppressed urgency. Now, the teleportation was a jarring shift back to the fragile peace of their headquarters. Newly repaired room felt like a sanctuary, but the invisible walls of their territory had been breached. They were a flock that had just learned a wolf was not just at the door, but living among them, wearing the sheep's fleece. Sona has to be warned, Rias said, pacing in front of the fireplace. The student council must know there is a high-ranking angel, possibly a seraph, operating in Kuo, masquerading as a student. He's not just operating, Kiba said, his face grim. He's planning something. A cleansing is coming. The pieces are already in motion. That wasn't a boast. It was a statement of fact. He wants to purge the town, Akeno murmured, sinking onto the sofa. She hugged herself, a rare gesture of vulnerability. Starting with us. Rias stopped pacing and turned to Naruto, who was standing by the window, staring out at the twilight sky. You felt him before, didn't you? The gaze you mentioned. It was him. Naruto nodded, his back still to them. He was the observer. Now he's the field agent. Can you fight him? Kaneko asked, her question blunt and direct, cutting through the strategic talk to the heart of the matter. You beat Riser. But that angel, he feels different. Colder. It was the question on everyone's mind. Naruto's power was immense, reality-defying, but Zerachiel's was absolute. It was the power of a fundamental concept, purity, wielded with fanatical devotion. Naruto turned from the window, his expression somber. His power is great, he admitted. But it's brittle. It has no flexibility. It only knows how to destroy. Power like that can be redirected. It can be shattered, but it will cause a lot of damage in the process. He looked at each of them, his gaze lingering for a moment on Akeno. His real weapon isn't that light. It's his ideology. He'll try to break you from the inside first. He'll try to make you believe him. To make you believe you are a flaw. He walked over to the sofa and sat down, not next to Akeno, but on the coffee table in front of her. He looked her directly in the eye. He's wrong, he said, his voice soft but firm. Your power isn't a contradiction. It's a bridge. You are half devil, half angel. You are proof that two opposing forces can exist in one person. You are not an error, Akeno. You are the blueprint for a solution. Akeno stared at him, her violet eyes wide. For years, she had viewed her heritage as a curse, a source of pain and conflict. He had just reframed it, not as a flaw, but as a unique strength. A tear she didn't know she was holding back traced a path down her cheek. She quickly wiped it away. But the teasing mask was replaced by something softer, something filled with a hesitant, fragile hope. Rias watched the exchange, a complex knot of emotions tightening in her chest. He hadn't just reassured Akeno. He had given her a new way to see herself. He was more than a guardian. He was becoming their anchor, the one who held them together when the world tried to tear them apart. She cleared her throat, pulling the focus back. We need a plan. We need to know what he's doing. What? Pieces. He's moving. We go on the offensive, Kiba said, his fighting spirit ignited. Find him and force him out of our territory. No, Naruto countered immediately. That's what he wants. He wants us to act like aggressive, territorial, impurities. To prove his point, he won't fight us head-on, not yet. He'll set a trap. He'll try to orchestrate a situation where we are forced to reveal ourselves, to use our demonic power in public, and then he will cleanse us in the name of protecting humanity. His strategic insight was chillingly accurate. He understood the enemy's mind, his doctrine. Then what do we do? Rias asked, her gaze locked with his. In that moment, she wasn't just a king asking a subordinate. She was a leader asking her most trusted advisor for his counsel. We watch, Naruto said. We listen. We do our jobs. We protect the people in this town, human and otherwise. We show him, through our actions, that his doctrine of purity is wrong. That coexistence is possible. We fight his ideology not by destroying him, but by proving him irrelevant. It was a strategy of quiet defiance, of passive resistance that was, in its own way, more aggressive than any direct assault. It was a battle for the soul of the town, fought not with fire and brimstone, but with patience and principle. As if on cue, Rias's personal communicator, a small demonic device, chimed. It was a priority message from Sona Citri. Rias activated it, and her rival's calm, measured voice filled the room. Rias, Sona's voice said, tinged with an uncharacteristic urgency. I'm detecting a massive and highly unusual holy energy signature emanating from the old abandoned church on the edge of town. It's not passive, like a consecrated ground. It's active. It feels like someone is building something. Rias looked at Naruto, a dawning horror in her eyes. The pieces were already in motion. The cleansing was beginning. Zerachiel wasn't just waiting. He was turning an old, forgotten place of worship into a weapon. Chapter 6 End. Chapter 7. The resonator in the sanctuary. Sona Citri's voice, usually a paragon of calm control, was clipped with an urgency that sent a chill through the already tense club room. The energy output is doubling every hour. It's not a weapon being aimed, Rias. It's a system being brought online. Whatever it is, it's designed to affect a massive area. The entire town, at least. The communication circle flickered and died, leaving the Gremory peerage in a heavy, anxious silence. The abstract thread of Zerachiel's ideology had just been given a physical location and a ticking clock. He's fortifying his position, Kiba stated, his hand resting on the hilt of a sword he hadn't yet summoned. He's daring us to make a move. Then let's make one, Kaneko said, her voice a low growl. Let's smash it before it's finished. No, Naruto and Rias said in perfect unison. They looked at each other, a flicker of surprise passing between them at their shared tactical conclusion. Rias, recovering first, took command. Kaneko is right that we can't wait. But a frontal assault is exactly what he's expecting. He's an angel of immense power. The church will be warded, trapped, and defended. To attack it head-on would be suicide, and it would prove his point that we are nothing more than violent beasts. She turned her gaze to Naruto, a silent transfer of the floor. The entire peerage now looked to him, not just as a powerhouse, but as their strategist. He wants to goad us into a fight on his terms, Naruto affirmed, his voice calm and steady, a grounding force in the storm of their anxiety. He's using a holy site, a place that amplifies his power and weakens ours. A direct attack would fail, and the resulting explosion of holy and demonic energy would likely level the surrounding neighborhood. We can't win by force. We have to win with information. He stood and walked to the center of the room, his presence commanding their full attention. We go in, but we go in quiet. A reconnaissance mission. Kiba, Kaneko, you're the outer ring. I need you to approach from the north and west. Stay at least 500 meters out. Kiba, use your speed to scout the perimeter. Look for physical patrols, magical triggers, anything that looks out of place. Kaneko, I need your senses. Ignore the overwhelming holy energy and focus on the details. Listen for heartbeats, feel for shifts in the air, smell for anything other than old wood and incense. You are our eyes and ears. Both the knight and rook nodded, their expressions serious. The plan was clear, their roles vital. Akeno, Naruto continued, turning to the queen. You're our magical support and overwatch. You'll stay with Kiba and Kaneko, but your job is to analyze the wards from a distance. You understand the interplay of holy and demonic magic better than anyone. I need to know what we're walking into. Be ready to create a diversion, a large-scale illusion or a contained thunderstorm, if we need to get out fast. Foo, a little thunder and lightning to spoil an angel's day. Akeno's smile had returned, but now it held a sharp, dangerous edge. I can certainly do that. That leaves us, Naruto said, his blue eyes meeting Rias's ruby ones. You and me, we're the infiltration team. We go inside, we identify the device, we learn its function, and we find its weakness. Then, and only then, do we decide how to disarm it. Rias felt a thrill of nervous energy. It was a sound plan, logical and precise. But it also placed her directly beside him, in the heart of the enemy's sanctuary, relying completely on his unprecedented abilities. Agreed, she said, her voice firm. Let's move. The abandoned church stood on a lonely hill at the edge of town, a skeletal silhouette against the purple, moonlit sky. From a distance, it looked forgotten, derelict. But as they drew closer, they could feel it. A profound, oppressive silence. It wasn't the absence of sound, it was the absence of life. The chirping of crickets, the rustling of leaves, the natural hum of the world. It all died at the edge of the church grounds. It was as if the land itself was holding its breath. I've circled the perimeter. Kiba's voice came through their communication link, a hushed whisper. No physical guards, but the air is thick with wards. They're layered. It's beautiful work, I have to admit. And terrifying. He's here, Kaneko added, her own voice tight. I can't see him. I can't pinpoint him. But I can feel his presence. It's like a statue in the middle of the garden. Cold, still, watching everything. Naruto and Rias crouched behind a crumbling stone wall, looking at the church's entrance. To Rias's demonic senses, the holy energy was a blinding wall of light, a raging inferno of purity that made her skin crawl. Akeno, what do you see? Rias whispered into her calm. It's a feedback loop, Akeno's voice replied, laced with a grudging admiration. Any demonic energy that touches the outer ward doesn't just trigger an alarm. It gets absorbed, amplified, and then broadcast like a flare. It's designed to not just detect us, but to expose us to any other holy beings in the vicinity. It's a trap and a beacon, all in one. A perfect defense. They couldn't break Chi without announcing their presence to the heavens, and they couldn't sneak through it as their very nature would give them away. I can get us through, Naruto said quietly beside her. He held out his hand. The serene, azure energy he had used to tame Searzex's power of destruction coalesced around his palm. It didn't burn or crackle, it simply was. His ward reacts to demonic energy. My energy is, neither. It's the energy of life itself. Of balance. I can create a bubble, a small pocket of neutral space. It won't break the ward, it will just convince it that we're not there. But you'll have to stay close. Very close. And you have to trust me completely. Don't let any of your own aura leak out. Rias looked from his calm, focused face to the shimmering, deadly barrier of light. Her every instinct screamed at her to not go near it. But her trust in the boy beside her was, to her own surprise, absolute. She nodded. Naruto placed a hand on her shoulder, and the blue energy flowed from him, enveloping both of them in a thin, shimmering sphere. Inside the bubble, the oppressive holy pressure lessened. It was like being in the calm eye of a hurricane. Ready? He asked. She gave another firm nod. Slowly, they stood and walked forward. As their bubble of neutral energy touched the invisible ward, the blinding light seemed to part around them, flowing over their shield like water over a smooth stone. It did not recognize them. It did not see them. They were a blind spot in the angel's perfect vision. They passed through the main doors and into the nave of the church. The sight that greeted them stole Rias's breath. The interior was pristine, scrubbed clean of all decay. Pews were arranged in perfect, symmetrical rows. But the air was filled with a soft, internal luminescence that seemed to emanate from the very stone itself. And in the center, where the altar should have been, stood the device. It was a colossal crystalline structure, at least 30 feet tall, shaped like a great, multifaceted tuning fork. It hummed with a low, resonant frequency that vibrated in their bones. Intricate, glowing golden runes spiraled up its length, channeling a torrent of energy from a glowing circle on the floor. It was drawing power directly from the town's ley lines, the rivers of natural magic that flowed beneath the earth. He's poisoning the well, Rias whispered in horror. He's taking the natural energy of the land and refining it, purifying it into this weapon. They moved closer, using the shadows of the pillars for cover. As they neared the crystalline structure, the purpose of the runes became clear to Rias's magically trained eyes. They weren't just channeling power, they were modulating a frequency. It's a resonator, she breathed, the full horror of the plan crashing down on her. It's not designed to fire a beam or explode. It's going to release a wave. A high-frequency pulse of holy energy across the entire town. It wouldn't harm humans, but for any being with demonic power, it would be agony. It would cripple us, sever our connection to our magic. Weaker devils, it might even dissolve them. It was a weapon of genocide, elegant and absolute. A cleansing is coming, Naruto murmured, repeating the angel's words. This was what he meant. A silent, invisible purge. You were quick to understand, a voice echoed through the nave. It was calm, melodic, and came from everywhere at once. It is a sign of intelligence. Wasted, on a flawed vessel. A figure of pure, white light flickered into existence atop the resonator. It was a perfect, ethereal effigy of Zerachiel, his expression serene and condescending. He hadn't been waiting in the church. The church was his vessel. I must confess, I did not think you would find a way past my wards, Naruto Uzumaki, the projection said. Its gaze piercing through their hiding spot. Your energy is a fascinating anomaly. An error in the system I intend to correct. But your presence here is welcome. It allows me to deliver the terms of salvation. We're not interested in your terms, Rias snarled, stepping out from behind the pillar, her demonic aura flaring instinctively before she suppressed it. Oh, but you will be. Zerachiel's projection replied, a hint of amusement in its tone. The resonator will reach full power in 24 hours. At sunset tomorrow, it will activate. I am giving you and every other impurity in this town a choice. Flee. Abandon this territory you so arrogantly claim. Scatter like the vermin you are. And you will be permitted to live, for a time. He paused, letting the weight of his ultimatum sink in. Or, you can stay. You can cling to your pathetic pride and your home. And you will be unmade. Your power will be stripped, your forms broken, and you will be rendered helpless for the final glorious purification. This is not a threat. This is a mercy. The design is benevolent. It offers even the flawed a chance to recognize their error and remove themselves from the equation. The projection of light began to glow brighter. The choice is yours, Crimson Heiress. Run, and prove that your claims of responsibility are hollow. Or stay, and be erased. Goodbye. The effigy dissolved, but the hum of the resonator intensified. The glowing circle on the floor flared, and walls of solid, golden light erupted from the ground, slamming into place and sealing the exits. The trap hadn't been to kill them. It was to deliver the message and then cage them. Let's go, Naruto yelled, grabbing Rias's arm. He didn't run for the door. He ran for the massive stained glass window high above the nave. Give me a boost. Rias didn't question him. She planted her feet, cupped her hands, and Naruto stepped into them. With a surge of demonic strength, she launched him upwards. As he soared through the air, holy constructs, angelic knights made of pure light, materialized from the walls, their swords drawn. One of them appeared directly in Naruto's path. He didn't try to fight it. He twisted in midair, placed his feet on the creature's chest, and kicked off, using its own form as a springboard to propel himself even higher. He reached the window and punched. His fist, wrapped in its balancing blue energy, didn't shatter the glass. It passed through the holy power suffusing it, and then he grabbed the lead frame and tore the entire window from its casement. He landed on the floor as constructs converged on Rias. She met them with cold fury. A sphere of destruction, not large and chaotic, but small, dense, and precise, erased the first knight. She dodged a sword strike from another. Her movements fluid and practiced. Rias, now, Naruto yelled from the ground. She disengaged, running for the wall beneath the shattered window. Naruto was already there. Jump, he commanded. She leapt, and he was there to catch her, throwing her upwards with all his strength towards the opening. She sailed through the hole into the cool night air, twisting to land gracefully on the grass outside. Naruto followed a second later, springing up the wall with impossible agility. They didn't stop to look back. They ran, a silent, unified retreat, melting back into the darkness of the woods as the church behind them sealed itself shut, its low, resonant hum a promise of the doom that was to come. They regrouped with their peerage at the edge of the woods, the oppressive silence of the church grounds behind them. Akeno, Kiba, and Kaneko looked at them, their faces etched with questions. It's a resonator, Rias said, her voice grim, her breathing still heavy from the exertion. A town-wide, anti-devil weapon, and we have 24 hours until it goes off. The weight of the deadline settled on them all, a physical burden. A frontal assault was impossible. They couldn't evacuate every supernatural being from Kuo in time. And there was no conceivable way to disarm a device powered by the very land itself and defended by a Seraph-class angel. They were trapped, checkmated. In the grim silence, Kiba looked at the resonator's creator in his mind's eye. Akeno saw the face of the zealot who would erase her. Kaneko felt the chill of the coming, silent destruction. Rias felt the crushing weight of her responsibility as king, the lives of her beloved servants resting squarely on her shoulders. She looked at Naruto, the one person who had defied the impossible time and time again. Her fear, her desperation, her hope, all coalesced into a single, whispered question. What do we do? Chapter 7 End. Chapter 8. The King's Two Choices. The Occult Research Club room, once a sanctuary, had become a war room. The holographic map of Kuo still floated above the central table, but no one was looking at the pulsing red dots of minor contracts. All eyes were on a single, blazing white point of light on the town's eastern hill, the church. It pulsed with a slow, steady rhythm, like a malevolent heart counting down the hours to an execution. Despair was a cold, heavy blanket settling over the room. They had faced a superior force, confirmed the nature of the weapon, and been handed an ultimatum with no acceptable answer. Zerachiel had presented them with a perfect trap, a philosophical checkmate. We can't win, Kiba said, his voice a low, frustrated growl. He was pacing the floor, his usual suave demeanor stripped away to reveal the raw, restless energy of a caged wolf. His wards are absolute. The device is indestructible by any magic we possess. Even if we could get inside, he's a Seraph-class being. He could incinerate us all before we got within 10 feet of that crystal. Quote, so we run, Akeno murmured, her voice hollow. She was seated on the sofa, staring at her own hands as if they were alien things. The resonator wasn't just a threat to her life. It was a judgment against her very existence. Zerachiel's words had struck a deep, discordant chord within her, and the vibrations had not yet ceased. We do as he says. We abandon the town. No, Kaneko said from her corner, her voice small but hard as granite. We don't run. This is our home. It's a home we can't defend. Akeno snapped, her control finally breaking. What's the alternative, Kaneko? We stay here and let that machine tear the magic from our bodies. We let him cleanse us. Is that a better death than living to fight another day? The room fell silent, the raw pain in Akeno's outburst hanging in the air. Rias stood by the fireplace, her back to them, her crimson hair hiding her expression. She felt the truth in both arguments. Akeno's logic was sound, a tactical retreat to preserve their forces. It was the smart move. Kaneko's defiance was the soul of their peerage, the loyalty that bound them together. It was the honorable move. And the two choices were tearing her apart. She was Rias Gremory, heiress to a great house. Her name was synonymous with pride and power. To abandon her territory, to flee from a threat, was a stain upon that name she could never wash away. She was also a king. These people were not her soldiers, they were her family. She had brought each of them back from the brink of death or despair, given them a new life, a new home. Her first and most sacred duty was to protect them. How could she lead them into a battle that was, by every logical metric, unwinnable? My duty as a Gremory is to hold this territory, she said, her voice barely a whisper. Speaking her internal conflict aloud. My duty as a king is to protect my servants. Today, for the first time, those duties are not the same. She turned to face them. And they could see the profound agony in her eyes. It was the true burden of leadership. The moment where there are no good choices, only the least terrible. If I order you to stay, I am condemning you to death for my pride. If I order you to flee, I am a coward who has abandoned her post. Zerachiel did not just build a weapon. He built a dilemma designed to break my will. The weight of her words settled. A final admission of defeat. They were checkmated. Through it all, Naruto had been silent. He sat at the table, his fingers steepled, his eyes closed, listening. He had listened to their fear, their logic, their loyalty. And their king's impossible choice. Now, he opened his eyes, and the serene blue in them was as clear and deep as the ocean. He gave you two doors, Naruto said, his voice cutting through the despair. One leads to a life of shame. The other leads to an honorable death. Both lead to his victory. He stood up, his presence suddenly filling the room, not with pressure, but with a quiet, unshakable confidence. When your enemy offers you 2 doors, you don't choose one. You make your own. Everyone turned to him. The shift in the room's atmosphere was instantaneous. We aren't going to break the wards, he stated. We aren't going to flee. And we aren't going to die. He walked to the holographic map and placed his hand over the blazing white dot of the church. We're going to use his own weapon against him. A flicker of confusion, then hope, crossed their faces. What do you mean? Rias asked, taking a step closer. The resonator is drawing power from the ley lines, Naruto explained. His voice taking on a focused, strategic tone. It's taking pure, natural life energy and refining it, converting it into holy power. He thinks he's the only one who can touch those lines. He's wrong. Quote, he looked at each of them, his plan crystallizing as he spoke. I can also connect to the ley lines. My energy, the senjutsu I use, is based on the same natural force. I'm not going to try to shut the device down from the outside. I'm going to do the opposite. I'm going to feed it. Kiba's eyes widened in understanding. You're going to overload it. Exactly, Naruto confirmed. The resonator is a filter, designed to handle a specific flow of energy and convert it. I'm going to find the main ley line it's drawing from and pour every ounce of my own life force into it. I'll send a tidal wave of raw, untamed natural energy into his perfectly calibrated machine. A filter that fine can't handle that kind of pressure. It will choke, it will fracture, and for a few crucial moments, the wards it powers will become unstable. He turned to the peerage. That's your window. While I am overwhelming it from the outside, you will attack. The flickering wards will be your entrance. You'll fight your way to the resonator, and just as my energy surge reaches its peak, you will strike the central focusing crystal. We will shatter it from the inside and the outside at the exact same time. It was an insane plan. A beautiful, brilliant, insane plan. It was a strategy of such audacious defiance that for a moment, no one could speak. It wasn't a retreat, and it wasn't a suicidal charge. It was a precise, coordinated counterattack that turned the enemy's strength into his greatest weakness. But then, Rias saw the flaw. The terrible, personal cost. What will happen to you? She asked, her voice sharp with alarm. You're talking about connecting your entire life force to a divine weapon. The feedback, the strain, Naruto, it could kill you. He met her gaze, and his expression was deadly serious. It's a risk. I'll be completely vulnerable while I'm doing it. But it's the only way. No, Rias said immediately, stepping in front of him. Absolutely not. I will not trade your life for ours. That is not a victory. We will find another way. There is no other way, he said, his voice gentle but firm. And this is more than just about saving you, Rias. This is my fight, too. His entire philosophy, his doctrine of purity, is a rejection of everything I am. He sees connection as a weakness. He calls your peerage a collection of errors. I am going to use the connection between me, all of you, and the land itself to prove that he is fundamentally wrong. He looked past her, at Akeno, at Kiba, at Kaneko. Then his gaze returned to Rias, and it was filled with a profound sincerity that shook her to her core. My power, he said, speaking the words for the first time, the source of what I am, my sacred gear is called the Harem King's Will. The name was so unexpected, so outrageously absurd in the face of their grim reality, that it hung in the air for a disbelieving moment. Akeno blinked. Kiba looked utterly baffled. It sounds like a joke, Naruto admitted with a faint, wry smile. But it's not. Its purpose isn't to rule or to conquer. It's to be a pillar. An anchor. It connects me to the people I am fated to protect and give me the strength to be the foundation they can stand on. If I run from this fight, if I let him erase you because I'm afraid of the cost, then this power is meaningless. I am meaningless. He held up his right hand, and the faint outline of the crimson spiral seemed to glow for a moment under the clubroom lights. This isn't a sacrifice. It's a statement of purpose. Rias stared at him, the outer, aegis name of his power echoing in her mind. A harem king. It should have been offensive, arrogant. But the way he said it, the quiet conviction behind it, it wasn't about possession. It was about devotion, a destiny he had not chosen, but had accepted with his entire being. She saw his resolve, as unshakable as the earth itself. He was not her servant to command, nor an outsider to be protected. He was her partner in this. Her anchor. To deny him this fight would be to deny the very core of who he was. The agony of her impossible choice was replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. She was a king, and a king's duty is to lead her forces to victory, using every asset she has. He was her greatest asset. She had to trust him. "All right," she said, her voice steady now, infused with the steel of command. "We do it your way." She looked him dead in the eye, her expression fierce. "But you are not dying, Naruto Uzumaki. You are not allowed to. That is an order from your king." A smile touched Naruto's lips. "Yes, ma'am." The atmosphere in the room transformed. Despair was burned away by the fires of purpose. They had a plan. A desperate, impossible, beautiful plan. They spent the next few hours in intense preparation. Akeno, her earlier despair replaced by a focused energy, prepared powerful enchantment seals to bolster their defenses. Kiba entered a meditative state, his demonic power coalescing as he prepared to summon his most powerful sword-birthed creations. Kaneko consumed a calculated amount of sweets, converting the sugar into pure, explosive Tuki she would store for the battle ahead. Rias, meanwhile, was in constant communication with Sona Citri, explaining the plan and coordinating their roles. Sona's peerage would create a subtle, town-wide illusion to mask the inevitable energy flare of the battle from human perception, a critical support role that would keep their secret world hidden. As the final hour before dawn approached, Naruto slipped outside, finding a quiet clearing under the two pale moons of the underworld, which were somehow visible from the club's grounds. He sat cross-legged on the grass, his eyes closed, his hands resting on his knees. He began to breathe, slowly, evenly. His senses expanded, moving past the club room, past the school, out into the sleeping town. He reached down, not into the soil, but into the very life of the world beneath it. He touched the ley lines. He felt them as rivers of light, a vast, interconnected network of pure energy. He could feel the malignant presence of the resonator, a parasitic drain siphoning off that energy. He familiarized himself with the pathways, mapping the flow, finding the main tributary that led directly to the church on the hill. He was preparing his body, his spirit, his very soul to become a conduit for a power that could tear a lesser being to shreds. He heard a soft footstep on the grass behind him. He didn't need to open his eyes to know it was Rias. She didn't speak for a long time, simply standing there, watching him. The silence was not awkward, it was filled with 1,000 things they couldn't say. "We're ready," she said finally, her voice soft. He didn't move. "I know." She walked over and sat down beside him. She didn't touch him, but he could feel her presence, a warmth against the cool night air. She followed his gaze towards the horizon, where the deep purple of the sky was just beginning to soften. "Thank you, Naruto," she whispered. It wasn't just for the plan. It was for everything. For Riser. For her brother. For Akeno. For giving her a way out of an impossible choice. He finally opened his eyes and turned to her. In the pre-dawn light, her crimson hair seemed to capture the last of the moonlight, and her eyes, usually fiery and imperious, were filled with a vulnerable, trusting light. "We're all in this together," he said. It wasn't a platitude. It was a promise. The first rays of the sun broke over the horizon, painting the edges of the clouds in hues of pink and gold. The day of the cleansing had begun. Chapter 8 End. Chapter 9. The Sundering of Purity. Sunset. The sky over Kuo town was a masterpiece of bleeding colors, a glorious, defiant blaze of orange and crimson against the deepening purple of twilight. It was the deadline, the moment of the cleansing. On a grassy hill a kilometer south of the abandoned church, Naruto Uzumaki sat cross-legged, his back straight. His eyes closed. He was the focal point of a storm only he could see. Before him, the Gremory peerage stood in a grim, determined line, their faces illuminated by the dying light of the sun. Rias, Akeno, Kiba, Kaneko. They were not servants awaiting orders. They were a unified front, a single weapon aimed at the heart of their enemy. "Sona's team is in position," Rias said, her voice crisp and clear through their telepathic link. "The illusion is stable. To any human eye, this is just another quiet evening." She looked at Naruto's still form. "Are you ready?" Naruto didn't open his eyes. He gave a single, slow nod. His part of the plan had to begin first. There would be no signal, no dramatic countdown. The flickering of the wards would be their only call to arms. He took a final, deep breath. And then he plunged his consciousness downwards. He bypassed the physical world, the soil and the stone, and sank into the living currents of the planet. He found the ley line he had mapped hours before, the main artery of natural energy that the resonator was bleeding dry. It felt sluggish, tainted by the holy filter at its end. He reached out with his own life force, his senjutsu. And he did not just touch the ley line. He became it. The initial shock was blinding. It was like trying to swallow a river. Raw, untamed planetary energy, the lifeblood of the world, surged into his spirit. His physical body arched back, a silent scream locked in his throat. The whisker marks on his cheeks began to glow with a soft, blue light. The crimson spiral on his hand burned like a brand. He was no longer a boy sitting on a hill. He was a dam about to burst, a conduit for a power far beyond the scale of any single being. He gathered that power, a raging ocean of it, and with a single, focused act of will, he pushed. At the church, the hum of the great crystalline resonator was reaching its crescendo. Inside, Zerachiel floated serenely in the center of the nave, his arms outstretched. His eyes closed in holy rapture. The moment of purification was at hand. The glorious, perfect frequency was about to be unleashed, scouring the town of its demonic stains. Restoring a small piece of the grand design. And then he felt it. A tremor. A surge of power from the ley line that was not clean, not refined. It was a torrent of raw, chaotic, living energy. It as like a blast of mud into a pristine water filter. The hum of the resonator changed, deepening into a discordant, grinding groan. The golden runes spiraling up its length began to flicker erratically. "What is this?" Zerachiel whispered, his eyes snapping open. An impurity, in the very source. Outside, the Gremory peerage saw their signal. The perfectly smooth, golden sheen of the holy ward's hat surrounded the church grounds suddenly sputtered. It wavered, glitching like a faulty projection, the light flickering between brilliant gold and a sickly, pale yellow. "That's our invitation," Kiba said, a demonic sword of black steel already forming in his hand. "Let's not be late. Go," Rias commanded, and they exploded into motion. Kiba was a blur, a black streak against the dying light. His feet barely seeming to touch the ground. He reached the faltering ward first, timing his entry to a moment of weakness, and phased through it with barely a whisper of resistance. Kaneko was right behind him. Her small form a cannonball of raw power, shattering the weakened barrier with a contemptuous punch that sent ripples through the air. Akeno and Rias followed, passing through the breach together. They were in. The grounds were empty, silent. The only sound was the groaning hum of the resonator from within the church. "The door," Rias ordered, but Kiba was already there, his sword a blur. He struck not the lock, but the hinges, and with two precise, shrieking cuts of demonic steel, the massive oak doors groaned and fell inwards. They stormed the nave. Zerachiel was there, descending from the air. His face no longer a mask of serene pity, but of cold, incandescent fury. "Insects," the angel hissed, his voice echoing with celestial power. "You gnaw at the foundations of paradise. You defile this holy ground with your very presence. This is our ground, angel." Rias roared back, a sphere of pure destructive energy forming in her hand. "And you are trespassing." She unleashed the sphere. Zerachiel simply raised a hand, and a wall of golden light intercepted it, absorbing the blast in a shower of crimson and gold sparks. "Your power is chaos," he declared. "Mine is order. You cannot prevail." From the walls, the floor, the very air, his angelic constructs materialized. An army of golden armored knights, their faces blank, their swords blades of pure, solidified light. The Gremory peerage met them head-on. It was a maelstrom of controlled violence. Kiba became a whirlwind of black steel, his movements a fluid dance of death. He didn't meet the constructs, overwhelming strength head-on. He redirected their blows, his sword finding the ethereal joints in their armor, causing them to dissolve into motes of light. Kaneko was his opposite. She was a battering ram of pure, physical will. She met the angel's charge with her own, her small fist striking with the force of meteorites. Each impact sent shockwaves through the constructs, shattering their forms of light with raw, untamed power. She was the rook, the unmovable, unbreakable castle at the heart of their formation. Overhead, Akeno flew on leathery devil wings, her laughter sharp and wild. A little divine punishment for the divine, she purred, unleashing a storm of paradox. Her holy lightning, born of her fallen angel heritage, crackled down, a power the constructs were not designed to resist. It tore through their ranks, a chaotic, personal judgment against an army of absolutes. Rias was the commander, the heart of the storm. She moved with a regal, deadly grace, using her power of destruction not as a wild force, but as a precise surgical tool. A lance of crimson energy would pierce through 3 constructs at once. A small, contained sphere would erase a flanking group before they could form. She was directing her family, covering their weaknesses, exploiting every opening. But for every construct they destroyed, 2 more materialized. They were fighting an endless army, powered by the holy energy of the church itself. They were being worn down, pushed back, foot by bloody foot. On the hill, Naruto was in agony. The feedback loop was immense. Holy energy from the resisting resonator was traveling back down the ley line. A counter-current of pure, sterile fire that burned against his life force. Steam was rising from his skin. The blue light around him flickered violently. His body was the rope in a tug of war between a planet and a divine machine, and the rope was beginning to fray. He could feel the peerage's struggle. He could feel their desperation, their determination. He couldn't let them down. With a roar that was felt in the very soul of the land, he opened the floodgates. He stopped holding anything back, pouring his essence, his will, his very being into the ley line. Inside the church, the groaning of the resonator became a high-pitched, agonized scream. Great cracks of azure light, Naruto's own energy, began to race up the crystal's surface. The endless stream of angelic constructs faltered, their forms flickering as their power source became unstable. Now, Rias screamed, seeing their chance. To the crystal, Zerachiel appeared before them, blocking their path. He was no longer trying to contain them. His face was a mask of terrible, divine wrath. Enough. His voice shook the foundations of the church. He spread his arms, and a wave of pure, golden, annihilating light erupted from his body. It was not an attack. It was a cleansing. Akeno, Kiba, and Kaneko were thrown back, their attacks dissolving, their bodies slamming into the pews. The Y cried out in pain as the holy light burned their demonic flesh. Only Rias stood her ground. She met the wave of light with a shield of pure destruction, a swirling vortex of crimson and black that fought against the golden tide. The 2 forces met in a titanic struggle, the air itself screaming as order and chaos tried to unmake one another. You are nothing, Zerachiel roared, pouring more power into his attack. A flicker of shadow against an eternal sun. Rias's shield began to crack. Her strength was failing. She could feel her energy being scoured away, her very essence threatened. She risked a glance at the screaming, fracturing crystal. It was now or never. She saw the raw, blue energy from Naruto arcing across its surface, weakening it from within. She saw her family, her beloved peerage, struggling to rise, ready to die for her. She saw Naruto, in her mind's eye, burning himself away for her. Her choice was not to survive. It was to win. With a final, desperate cry, she dropped her shield and funneled every last ounce of her power, her rage, her love for her family, into a single, focused point in her palm. It was not a sphere or a lance. It was a needle of pure, absolute annihilation. For my family, she screamed. She thrust her hand forward, through Zerachiel's wave of light. The holy energy burned her arm, searing her flesh to the bone, but she did not stop. Her needle of destruction pierced the golden tide and shot across the nave. It struck the central focusing crystal at the exact moment a final, colossal surge of Naruto's energy erupted from within. There was no sound. For a single, eternal moment, there was only light. A silent, impossible explosion of pure white as the holy energy, the natural energy, and the demonic energy all annihilated each other at once. The resonator, the perfect weapon of purity, shattered into a billion motes of dust. The wave of power that erupted from its destruction was not holy or demonic. It was neutral, a shockwave of pure force that blew the roof off the church and sent everyone, devil and angel alike, flying. On the hill, the feedback loop snapped. The sudden release of pressure sent Naruto's body flying backwards. He crashed to the ground, unconscious before he even landed, smoke rising from his still form. Back at the ruined church, Rias pushed herself up from the rubble. She was bruised, burned, and utterly exhausted, but she was alive. Her peerage was stirring, groaning but also alive. The angelic constructs were gone. The oppressive holy pressure was gone. Zerachiel stood in the center of the wreckage, where his resonator had been. His robes of light were torn, his form flickering. He was not physically harmed, but he was staring at the dust of his machine with an expression of utter, soul-shattering disbelief. His plan had been perfect. His power was absolute. His doctrine was truth. It was impossible. He looked at the four devils, a family of errors and flaws, standing together amidst the ruin of his perfect design. He looked at them, and for the first time, the angel of purity felt an emotion that was not part of the grand design. He felt doubt. Chapter 9 End. Chapter 10. A King's Reward. The world returned to Rias Gremory in a cascade of sensation. The sting of ozone in the air, the grinding protest of shattered stone under her boots, the dull, throbbing ache in her right arm. Where holy light had seared her to the bone. They had won. The oppressive hum of the resonator was gone, replaced by the quiet whisper of the night wind through the skeletal remains of the church. Victory felt less like triumph and more like exhaustion. Her peerage was gathering around her, battered but unbroken. Kiba helped Akeno to her feet, his usual grace marred by a limp. Kaneko was dusting herself off, her expression a mixture of grim satisfaction and weariness. They were alive. They had held the line. But their anchor was missing. Naruto. Rias breathed, her heart seizing with a cold dread that eclipsed any fear she had felt during the battle. She didn't have to give the order. They all turned as one, their gazes drawn to the southern hill. Even from a kilometer away, they could see the patch of scorched grass. They teleported, the magic a ragged, draining effort, and reappeared on the hill where their battle had truly been won. He was lying on his back, sprawled in the center of the blackened circle. His uniform was tattered, and faint trails of smoke still rose from his body. His face was pale, his breathing shallow, his usual vibrant life force a mere flickering ember. The crimson spiral on his hand was gone, the skin smooth but unnaturally pale. He had poured everything into that final surge, and the cost was terrifyingly clear. He's alive, Akeno said, her voice trembling slightly as she knelt beside him, her hands glowing with a soft, green demonic healing energy. But his energy is almost completely depleted. It's like his spirit is hollowed out. Rias knelt on his other side, her own crimson healing aura flaring to life. She placed her hand over his heart, trying to pour her own strength into him, but it was like trying to fill an ocean with a thimble. His system wasn't just empty. It was damaged from the feedback, the channels of his power burned by the holy energy he'd fought. We have to get him back, Rias said, her voice cracking with an emotion she refused to name. She scooped him into her arms, surprised at how light he felt, as if part of his very substance had been expended in the fight. Her gaze fell upon the wreckage of the church in the distance. In the center of the ruin stood a solitary, flickering figure. Zerachiel. He was watching them. He made no move to attack, no gesture of aggression. He simply stood there, a silent, defeated sentinel amidst the ashes of his own certainty. Rias met his distant gaze for a long moment. There would be a reckoning for this, for the scars on her family and the state of the boy in her arms. But not now. Now, her family needed to heal. With a final, defiant glare, she gave the command. Take us home. The vigil in the occult research club room was a silent, sacred thing. Naruto lay on the long sofa, Akeno and Rias sitting on either side of him, a steady, gentle flow of demonic and life energy pouring from their hands into his still form. It was a slow, arduous process. His body accepted their power, but his own spiritual core, the wellspring of his unique energy, remained dormant. Kiba stood guard by the door, his senses on high alert, while Kaneko sat in a nearby armchair, watching Naruto with an unblinking, protective intensity. The name of his sacred gear echoed in the quiet room. The Harem King's Will. It is a ridiculous name, Akeno said softly, a faint, weary smile touching her lips. And yet, I think I understand it now. It's not about possession. Kiba added from his post, his voice low and thoughtful. He called himself a pillar. An anchor. A king's strength is in his pieces. His strength is in his queens. Rias said nothing. She looked down at Naruto's peaceful, pale face. A king. He, too, was a king, of a different sort. His kingdom was not territory, but people. His law was not dominance, but devotion. He had called her one of the people he was bound to protect. The thought sent a confusing, powerful warmth through her chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with the healing energy she was channeling. She had spent her life fighting against being a prize to be won, a political asset to be married off. Naruto had fought for her not to claim her, but simply because she was her. Her thoughts were interrupted as the air in the center of the room grew cold. A figure shimmered into existence. It was Zerachiel. Instantly, Kiba's sword was in his hand. Kaneko was on her feet. Her fists clenched. Akeno's lightning crackled. Rias stood, shielding Naruto's body with her own, her eyes blazing with crimson fire. "You are not welcome here," she snarled. Zerachiel raised an empty hand. A gesture of peace. His form of light was unstable, flickering at the edges. The perfect, serene mask was gone, replaced by an expression of profound, aching confusion. "I am not here to fight," he said, his voice quiet, stripped of its divine certainty. "I am here to understand." His gaze fell upon the unconscious Naruto, then to the devils who had instantly formed a wall to protect him. "My doctrine was pure. My power was absolute. My logic was flawless. But I was defeated." He looked at Rias. "Why? How can a foundation of errors and flaws build something stronger than a perfect design?" Quote. It was a genuine question, the plea of a being whose entire reality had been shattered. Rias held his gaze, her anger slowly giving way to a weary understanding. She would not give him pity. But she would give him an answer. "Because you see connection as a corruption," she said, her voice ringing with the authority of a king who had just led her family through the fire. "To you, we are just flawed individuals. But together, we are more." Akeno's pain gives her strength. Kiba's past gives him purpose. Kaneko's silence holds a loyalty deeper than any oath. She gestured to Naruto. "And he did not fight for a design. He fought for us. Your power comes from a distant, cold ideal. Our power comes from right here. From each other. Your foundation is brittle perfection, Zerachiel. Ours is messy, flawed, and unbreakable love. That is why you lost." Zerachiel stared at her, her words striking him with more force than any physical blow. Love, connection. These were not variables in his grand design. They were chaos. And yet, that chaos had overthrown his order. "I see," he whispered. He gave a slight, formal bow, a gesture of concession from a defeated warrior. "I must report my failure. I must reconsider the doctrine." He turned, his form dissolving into motes of light. "The design will not be pleased." He vanished, leaving not a threat, but a chilling premonition. He was merely an agent. The true enemy, the power behind the doctrine, was still watching. As the tension from his visit receded, it was replaced by a far more intimidating presence. A silver and gray magic circle bloomed on the floor, and from it emerged Searsex's Lucifer and Graphia. Searsex's expression was not friendly or amused. It was grim. His violet eyes swept the room, taking in the exhausted peerage. The unconscious boy on the sofa, and the lingering scent of ozone and holy power. "I felt the sundering of the resonator from my office in the capital," he said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. The backlash of holy and demonic energy lit up every supernatural sensor on the planet. "Explain." Rias, exhausted but unbowed, stood before her brother and recounted the entire event. The ultimatum. The plan. Naruto's sacrifice. Their victory. When she finished, Searsex was silent for a long time. He walked over to the sofa and looked down at Naruto. He langed a seraph-class angel and shattered a divine weapon by turning the very land into his ally. He looked at Rias. "Do you understand what you have done? What he has done?" "We defended our home," Rias said, her chin held high. "You have fired a starter pistol in the middle of a graveyard," Searsex said, his voice grave. "The sleeping powers of this world are now awake, and they are all looking at Kuo Town. Michael and the other seraphs in heaven are demanding to know why one of their own has failed so spectacularly. The fallen angel leaders are intrigued by this new power that defies both of their factions. And the old houses of the underworld are terrified of a boy who can nullify a phoenix and stand against a great Satan. He placed a hand on her shoulder, his expression softening. You won, Rias. You proved yourself a true king. But in doing so, you have painted a target on your back the size of this continent. And on his. He looked at Naruto again, a hint of awe in his eyes. He is not a piece on the board anymore. He is his own player. A third axis in a world that only knows two. Forces will move to destroy him, to control him, or to claim him. You must be ready. As if summoned by his words, Naruto stirred. His eyes fluttered open, the blue within them dull and clouded with exhaustion. He tried to sit up, a groan escaping his lips. Easy, Rias said, immediately at his side, pushing him gently back down. Don't move. He looked around the room, at the concerned faces of the peerage, at the grim visage of the great Satan, and finally at Rias. A faint smile touched his lips. Did we win? We won, she confirmed, her voice thick with relief. Sears nodded, a genuine smile finally appearing on his face. Rest, Naruto Uzumaki. You have more than earned it. He turned to Rias. I will handle the political fallout. I will declare Kuo a special protectorate of the Gremory family, under the direct watch of Lucifer. It will give you some breathing room. Use it to get stronger. All of you. With a final, respectful nod towards Naruto, Sears and Graphia vanished in their silver light, leaving the family alone once more. The sun was now rising, its gentle morning light filtering through the windows. The long night was over. Later, after the others had finally retired to get some much-needed rest, Rias sat in a chair beside the sofa where Naruto was slowly recovering. He was awake, sipping a glass of water she had given him. The Harem Kings will, she said, breaking the comfortable silence. The words felt absurd on her tongue. You have to admit, it's a ridiculous name. He chuckled, a weak but genuine sound. Tell me about it. I think Destiny has a strange sense of humor. She looked at him, at the boy who had faced down gods and devils for her. Who had burned his own soul to protect her family. Your purpose, you said it was to be a pillar. An anchor. That's part of it, he said, his gaze meeting hers. It's about providing the foundation. So the people I'm connected to can build whatever future they choose. So they can be free. Free. It was the one thing she had always craved. Freedom from her engagement, from her family's expectations, from the rigid hierarchy of her world. He wasn't a king who sought to rule her. He was a king who fought to set her free. Impulsively, she leaned forward. She hesitated for only a second before, gently pressing her lips to his forehead. It wasn't a kiss of passion, or of romance, but of profound, overwhelming gratitude. It was a king's reward. Thank you, she whispered against his skin. When she pulled back, his cheeks were tinged with a faint red, and her own heart was beating a little faster than it should have been. All in a day's work, he murmured, his eyes smiling. She settled back into her chair, a real, genuine smile gracing her own lips. The battle for Kuo Town was over. They had faced the doctrine of purity and sundered it with the strength of their bonds. But she knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her bones, that this was only the beginning. The beacon had been lit. The great powers of the world were now looking their way. But for the first time, Rias Gremory was not afraid. She looked at the boy on the sofa, her anchor, her protector, her partner. The world was coming for them. Let it come. They would face it together. Chapter 10 End.